In today's video, we will be going back and grading every first-round pick from 2020 through 2024. We will be going in reverse order for each draft class, so we will be starting with the 2020 class and work our way forward to the present day. Obviously, this is a very long video as it is a comprehensive grading of 5 separate draft classes, and I hope you enjoy. And just a heads up, there will be a slight break between each draft class. Obviously, there is a lot of football and players to grade in today's video, and since it is such a long video, I am asking to, at the beginning, please like and subscribe as it helps the channel tremendously, and without further ado, let's begin! Clyde EdwardsHelaire was the final pick of the first round back in 2020 and was the first running back off the board. He had a productive first year in 2020 as he had 1,100 yards from scrimmage. Unfortunately, his production decreased year over year and he peaked in his rookie season. He also missed some time due to injury during the 2022 season, and ultimately a 7th round pick took his job, named Isaiah Pacheco. CEH had moments throughout his Chiefs tenure, but even when he was relied on, he was never the best player, and the moments he had occurred less and less as time went on. He played 2 games for the Saints in 2024 and averaged just 3.5 yards per carry, and unfortunately it is more than fair to say Clyde's best days are behind him. There's a reason running backs want to get paid when they have the opportunity, and it's because if they miss the opportunity, it's gone. Clyde has less than 2,000 career rushing yards and has just 19 career touchdowns, and this grade is a D. Jeff Gladney was the Minnesota Vikings' second first-round pick of the night after a trade back with the 49ers so they could draft receiver Brandon Ayuk. Unfortunately, Jeff is no longer with us as he passed away in May of 2022 at the age of 25. From a football standpoint, he was picked on as a rookie back in 2020 quite a bit, which was to be expected for any rookie corner, especially in a year where there were no preseason games, to learn from any sort of game experience. Jeff was released by the Vikings in August of 2021 due to an indictment for domestic violence, but I want this to be clear, he was found not guilty in March of 2022. He was picked up by the Cardinals shortly after before passing away in a car crash in May of 2022. Gladney was 25 years old at the time of his death, and may Jeff Gladney continue to rest in peace. The Dolphins selected Auburn corner Noah Igbinoghene with the 30th pick in the first round as he was their 3rd first-round pick of the night. The other two were Tua, of course, and offensive tackle Austin Jackson. Igbinoghene was a very young first-round pick back in 2020 as he was 20 years old for most of his rookie season and didn't turn 21 until late November. And because of this, I thought a lot of patience was going to be required with the selection, that he would have not just one but several welcome to the NFL moments early in his career. And he did, but he never panned out for the Dolphins the way they hoped. He was traded prior to the 2023 season to the Cowboys in a rare player-for-player exchange as he was traded for Cowboys corner Kelvin Joseph. He played 1 season for Dallas before becoming a free agent prior to the 2024 season and ultimately signed with Washington, which is where he is today. He didn't play bad for the Commanders in 2024 relative to what was expected, but this is grading how he played in Miami, and he played in 32 of 50 possible games for Miami during his 3 years there and was not good when he played. 5 years later, this is an F. Offensive tackle Isaiah Wilson was a pick Titans fans would like to forget, and there is almost zero footage of me to show from Wilson's career as he played 4 snaps for his entire career. 4. They were all against the Colts in Week 12 of 2020, and Wilson was traded less than a year later to the Dolphins for a 7th round pick. He was waived by the Dolphins 3 days later for missing a physical and missing 2 workouts. The Giants signed him to their practice squad in September, and he was released a few months later. Some NFL stories are long and some are short, and he played 4 snaps for the team that drafted him in the first round, and I honestly don't think it's unfair to say this is the biggest draft bust in NFL history. At least Ryan Leaf and Jamarcus Russell started and won NFL games for their teams. Isaiah Wilson played 4 career snaps, an F grade. Patrick Queen was the Ravens' first-round pick, and I really liked this selection at the time because I thought for sure the Seahawks were going to take Queen at pick 27, but they ended up taking Jordan Brooks instead. And because of that, I absolutely loved the selection when it was made, and it reminded me of the Ravens drafting Kyle Hamilton and Tyler Linderbaum a couple of years later, just good players falling into their laps. Queen had 3 100 total tackle seasons during his time in Baltimore, and the only season he didn't have 100 tackles was back in 2021 when he had, you guessed it, 98 total tackles. Now, tackles aren't everything, and we've discussed that before on the channel, but I think personally that I've underappreciated what Patrick Queen has accomplished through the years. During his final year in Baltimore, he was a Pro Bowler as well as a second-team All-Pro, and he was also a Pro Bowler in 2024 with the Steelers too. Now, what he does in Pittsburgh does not factor into this grade, and that applies to every draft pick, but Patrick Queen has never missed a game in his career, and he plays at a pretty high level. He misses a tackle or two more than you'd like, but he's a really solid player, and the Ravens got a lot of production out of a player drafted late in the first round. 5 years later, this is a B+. Jordyn Brooks was the Seahawks' first-round pick in 2020, and while I was surprised when this pick was made, he played a lot better than I initially thought he would. He started 55 games for the Seahawks in his 4 years with the team and had near-perfect attendance as he played in 63 of 67 possible games for Seattle and only missed 2 total games in his final 3 seasons with the team. And due to how violent the sport is, that's a bigger battle than you may initially think, is staying healthy. Brooks is now a Dolphin as he signed a 3-year deal with Miami last offseason, and he had a really good year for Miami in 2024 as he had over 140 tackles, had 11 tackles for a loss, and even had 3 sacks as an off-ball linebacker. The one big knock with Jordan is he gets picked on in coverage quite a bit, and that happened during his time in Seattle, and even happened during his time in Miami in 2024 too. Overall, his time in Seattle was okay for a first-round pick. You can certainly say that Seattle could have hoped for a little more from a first-round pick, but like we've seen throughout the draft grade videos, they could have done a lot worse. A B- grade. Jordan Love was the 4th quarterback taken in the first round of the 2020 draft, and this is a complicated pick to grade. On one hand, there's a lot of teams that would love to have Jordan Love be their franchise quarterback, and I get it. But on the other hand, he didn't play for 3 years and had just 3 touchdowns to 3 interceptions during the first 3 years of his career. And during his rookie season, Green Bay lost in the NFC Championship game and the divisional round of the playoffs the following season. Do things change if they draft T. Higgins instead? I don't know, but why this pick is also complicated is Jordan Love played really well during the 2023 season, but I don't think he played at the same level in 2024, and I also don't think he was fully healthy throughout the year, despite playing in 15 of 17 games after a pretty nasty injury in Week 1 against the Eagles. He has back-to-back 25-plus passing touchdown seasons, and honestly, I do think he is a tad underrated at the moment due to how he played in 2024. That, again, wasn't his best year for several reasons. I think there are several grades you can go with here that can justify the Jordan Love pick, but ultimately 5 years later, we gave this an A-. Brandon Aiyuk was the 6th receiver taken in the first round of the 2020 draft, and Aiyuk has been a solid player for the 49ers since being drafted. He had a near 750-yard rookie season back in 2020 before having 800 yards in 2021, then clearing the 1,000-yard mark for the first time in 2022, then exploded onto the scene with a 1,300-yard year in 2023, in which he was named a second-team All-Pro. There was a lot of drama around Aiyuk during the 2024 summer, and I think this soured some people on Brandon Aiyuk relative to the player he is when healthy, causing them to diminish what he has accomplished in the league. I am a firm believer that he was not 100% in 2024 before he unfortunately tore his ACL and MCL, and that he was slowly working his way back to being the player he was in 2023. He is a really good player when healthy, but is also overshadowed by 2 guys in this class in CeeDee Lamb and Justin Jefferson, which is unfortunate for Aiyuk. I also think there are a lot of teams that would love to have Brandon Aiyuk on their roster, most notably a team like the Patriots, but he is kind of difficult to grade. He has just shy of 300 career receptions and has 25 career receiving touchdowns, and 5 years later, we gave this an A-. Cesar Ruiz was the Saints' first-round pick in 2020, and he has mostly played right guard for them through the first 5 years. Ruiz has his ups and downs as a player, and I know he's not a household name by any means, but this is also a trickier pick to grade than you may think. On one hand, he's not a great player, and he's not a guy that will make 4 or 5 Pro Bowls by the end of his career, and a player that will be inducted into the Saints Ring of Honor. But on the other hand, he's probably going to start 85 or 90 or even 100 games for the Saints over the course of his career, if not more. He was a 21-year-old rookie, so he is just 26 years old, and he could realistically play for another 5 or 6 years and nobody would bat an eye. But he's also not great, and I think he is, in the grand scheme of things, an average player. I don't think there's any particular phase in his game where he's elite, nor do I think there's any area in his game where he's weak either. He's just a guy along the offensive line, and the Saints could have made a much worse selection than Cesar Ruiz, and 5 years later I do give a slight bonus for playing 13 games or more in every season of his career. Ultimately, we gave this a C+. Kenneth Murray for the Chargers is up, and it was a long 4 years in LA for Murray. He racked up a lot of tackles during his time in LA, but that's not everything, and it especially showed on tape that unfortunately carried over to his tenure in Tennessee, and based on the first 5 years of his career, will probably carry over to Dallas too. He reminds me a lot of Jamon Davis, a 2021 first-round pick, who, like Murray, does not have the instincts a good linebacker in the NFL needs to have, and there was a reason that despite playing in 59 of 67 possible games for the Chargers over the first few years of his career, that they were more than willing to let him go in free agency after the 23 season. Unfortunately, he missed more tackles than you would have liked as an inside linebacker, as his career missed tackle percentage is over 10%, and it peaked in 2021 at over 19%. He is only 26, and I wish him the best in Dallas and wherever else he may go throughout the rest of his NFL career, but even if he completely turns it around, this is based on his time in Los Angeles, and 5 years later, this gets a C-. Justin Jefferson was the 5th receiver taken in the 2020 draft, and in 5 years, Jefferson hasn't been just a good first-round pick for Minnesota, he's been an all-time draft pick for Minnesota. Jefferson has the most career receiving yards of any player through their first 5 seasons, as he has over 7,400 yards in 77 career games. He is a 4-time All-Pro and a 2-time First-Team All-Pro, and has 3 seasons with 1,500 or more yards. He has 5 1,000-yard seasons in 5 years, and he actually had more yards per game in 2023 than he did in 2022, which was the year he won the Offensive Player of the Year. Unfortunately, Jefferson got hurt and missed some time, but he still had a 1,000-yard year in 2023. I don't think Jefferson received as much media attention in 2024 as he has in other years, whether it was due to Ja'Marr Chase having a great year, or Saquon, or whoever, but he still had 1,500 yards and 10 touchdowns, and finished top 10 in Offensive Player of the Year voting. He isn't a player you factor into the game plan. He is the game plan for opposing defenses, and they still can't stop Jefferson. He has the most receiving yards per game in NFL history, and this is an easy A+. The Eagles stunned everyone when they selected TCU receiver Jaylen Regger with the 21st pick. It was a consensus to pretty much everyone that Justin Jefferson was a better prospect than Jaylen Regger, but they still made the pick. Now, one thing that gets misconstrued over time is that Justin Jefferson was not a can't-miss prospect, and Jaylen Regger was not a horrible prospect either. Regger was an early to mid-second round prospect, while Jefferson was a mid to late first round prospect himself. It was a gamble that unfortunately didn't pay off. In his first year with the Birds, Regger had 31 receptions for 396 yards and a touchdown, and then his second season he had 33 receptions for 299 yards and 2 touchdowns. Everyone drafts busts at some point, but it's unfortunate the Eagles drafted a bust directly in front of a player who is on pace to be an all-time great. If there is any consolation within this, it's that the Eagles drafted a future Super Bowl MVP with their second-round pick in Jalen Hurts, and the Eagles are an extremely successful franchise year in and year out that made a significant draft blunder, but have done a lot of great things since. Unfortunately, the Regger pick receives an F grade. Kavon Chaisson was a really good pass-rushing prospect from LSU, but unfortunately he didn't work out with the Jags. Chaisson played 57 games in 4 years with Jacksonville and played 15 or more games in 3 of his 4 seasons with the team, so he was a pretty durable player, but he wasn't effective when on the field. He had a then career-high 2 sacks with the Jags in 2023, and unfortunately he only started 11 games with the Jags over 4 years. He signed with the Panthers in the 2023 offseason, but they released him prior to the season starting. A week later, he was signed by the Raiders, where he would go on to play 15 games for them in 2024, in which he had 5 sacks and looked like a better player. Chaisson will be just 26 years old at the start of the 25 season, and there is a chance he can build off of what he did in 2024, which was being a serviceable player and more or less a pass rush specialist. Players like that have a role in the league, and I think there is a chance Chaisson sticks around longer than people may think due to this, as he is now a member of the Patriots. But ultimately, this grade is based on what he did during his time in Jacksonville. And Jacksonville had 2 first-round picks back in 2020, as they were Kavon Chaisson and corner CJ Henderson, and both were big whiffs. Ultimately, this grade is an F. The Raiders stunned everyone when they took Ohio State corner Damon Arnette with the 19th pick in the first round back in 2020, and I know the Raiders received a lot of criticism during this time period for first round picks, rightfully so, but I truly think this was the worst of them all. Clelin Ferrell was a player who had a high floor and was projected in the low to mid-20s of the 2019 draft that was selected at number 4 overall. Unfortunately, it didn't work out, but he was supposed to be a high floor, lower ceiling guy. Henry Ruggs was, to me, a talented player on his way to becoming a really good receiver that made a horrible life decision. But Damon Arnette was clearly a day 2, borderline day 3 guy, and he played like it. He only played in 13 career NFL games, and in 13 games he was targeted 40 times and allowed 31 receptions for 499 yards while allowing a single touchdown to no interceptions. There were so many better players on the board, and to make matters worse, he was released in 2021 after a video of him was released that was not a good look, which is a tremendous understatement, and I'll leave it at that. 5 years later, this is an F. Austin Jackson of the Dolphins is up, and he was their second of 3 first-round picks on the night. Jackson has been an okay or average player for Miami, really at best, and I think that's a good word to describe him. There's games where he plays really well, where he'll pitch a shutout as a pass protector, or maybe allow a single pressure on 35 or 40 pass rushing snaps, which is incredible. Then the following week will allow 5 pressures or 6 pressures on 30 pass blocking snaps and give up a sack as well. There's an old saying that a third of first-round picks are stars, a third are average, and a third are busts, and I think Jackson is pretty close to the epitome of average. He's played in 56 of 84 possible games, which I do think is a hair disappointing, because he's not great when he plays, and then you throw in the fact that he's missed a third of his career games, and that's not a great first-round pick by any stretch of the imagination. Having a player who is a gamble as to whether or not he'll play well on any given Sunday is not ideal for the franchise that selected them, but he's also played north of 50 games, which is a lot more than other players can say. He's not a bust, but he's not a hit either, and throw in the fact he's missed a third of his career games, and this is a C-. CeeDee Lamb was the third receiver taken in the 2020 draft, and through 5 years has 4 1,000-yard seasons and technically 4 1,100-yard seasons, and has been a terrific player for the Cowboys. Unfortunately, Dak Prescott was injured in October of CeeDee's rookie year, and we bring this up because I think it's fair to say that CeeDee would have rather easily been a 1,000-yard receiver if that injury never happened. He is quietly working on 3 straight 100-reception, 1,100-yard seasons, and is already a 4-time Pro Bowler at 26 years old. His best year by far was in 2023 when he had an outstanding 135 receptions for 1,749 yards and 12 touchdowns and was named a first-team All-Pro. Naturally, there's a lot of pressure playing for the Cowboys because of how much media attention they get and how often they play on primetime, but there's a lot more pressure when you are a receiver wearing the number 88 because you have the legacy to continue. It started back with Drew Pearson, then continued with Michael Irvin, and eventually continued with Dez Bryant too. And in 5 years, CeeDee has over 6,300 receiving yards and is just 4 receptions shy of 500 career catches. I know Justin Jefferson is in the same class as him and has over 1,000 career more receiving yards, but the grade for Lamb is pretty simple. It's an A+. AJ Terrell was the 16th pick in the first round of the 2020 draft, and Terrell, like a lot of corners from this class, struggled during his rookie season. There were certainly some flashes from AJ Terrell during the 2020 season, but when he was targeted, he allowed an opposing passer rating of 109.2. However, 2021 was a much different story as he was a second-team All-Pro and was undoubtedly one of the best players in football that year. But 2022 was another bad year for Terrell as he allowed 9 touchdowns to 0 interceptions when targeted, and there were a lot of questions surrounding Terrell after the 2022 season. Was he a one-year wonder was a question a lot of people were wondering at the time, but he's played a lot better over the last 2 years, and Falcons fans especially know that he doesn't get targeted as much as other corners on their roster. Teams don't completely look away from AJ Terrell like they may have a prime Darrelle Revis or Richard Sherman, but they definitely give it a second thought. Terrell is a really good corner, not an elite corner that completely shuts down your number 1 receiver, but a really good corner, and 5 years later, this is an A. Jerry Jeudy was the second receiver taken in the 2020 draft after the Raiders selected Henry Ruggs, and we will preface this not just with the Jeudy selection, but with another selection shortly, that this grade will be based off of what Jeudy did during his time in Denver. We bring this up, of course, because Jeudy set career highs in Cleveland this year in both receptions and receiving yards, as he had 90 receptions for over 1,200 yards, while his previous career high in Denver was 67 for 972. Jeudy wasn't a bad player during his time in Denver, but what particularly stinks for him is there were two much better players drafted after him in CeeDee Lamb and Justin Jefferson. Jeudy finished his time in Denver with 3,000 yards in 4 years and had just 11 receiving touchdowns. There was a point where Broncos fans were excited about the trio of Drew Lock, Jerry Jeudy, and Noah Fant offensively, and unfortunately it didn't last long. Jeudy had an extreme case of the drops as a rookie back in 2020, but did clean it up as his career progressed. I do think his talent is around the A- area, and I do like Jerry Jeudy a lot as a player, but 5 years later, this is a C+. Prior to the 2020 draft, the San Francisco 49ers traded former star defensive lineman DeForest Buckner to the Colts in exchange for their first-round pick. Buckner is a 3-time Pro Bowler and is a really good player for the Colts, and ironically, Javon Kinlaw's pro comparison in the pre-draft process was DeForest Buckner. Kinlaw had a solid rookie season as he had over 30 tackles, a couple of quarterback hits, a sack, and even a pick six. Not a groundbreaking rookie season, but there looked to be something there for 2021 and beyond. Unfortunately, he played in just 10 total games over the course of the next 2 years, and the 49ers declined his 5th-year option after the 2022 season. He played all 17 games for the Niners during the 2023 season and had a career-high 31 pressures as well as 3.5 sacks. He played 41 games in 4 years for the team that drafted him and was a non-factor for much of his tenure in the Bay Area. Kinlaw had just 5 sacks in 41 games, and this trade, the trading DeForest Buckner for the cheaper version of what was supposed to be himself, reminds me a lot of the A.J. Brown-Treylon Burks trade-off, but for the defensive tackle position. And if this trade proved anything, it's how difficult it is to replace good trench players. 5 years later, this is an F. Tristan Worfs was the 4th offensive tackle taken in the 2020 draft, and this is a prime example of just because a player isn't taken first at their position doesn't mean they can't be the best from their class. In 5 years, Worfs has 4 Pro Bowls to his name as well as 3 All-Pros, including 2 first-team All-Pros. He has been an outstanding player for the Bucs for the past 5 years, and he and fellow 2020 draftee Antoine Winfield Jr. played an instrumental role in the Bucs winning the Super Bowl over the Chiefs back in 2020. You often hear the phrase with offensive linemen in the draft process that they are a plug-and-play player, and this is exactly what Worfs has been through 5 years. He also became the first player in NFL history to be named a first-team All-Pro at both left and right tackle in 2024, as he switched from right tackle to left tackle after the 2022 season. He is on a Hall of Fame trajectory, and I think if he has another 2 to 3 good years, he will solidify himself as a future Gold Jacket, and anytime the word Gold Jacket is mentioned, you can probably guess what this grade is. An easy A+. Henry Ruggs was the first receiver taken in the 2020 draft, and Ruggs' game was predicated on speed and being an explosive football player. He ran a 4.27 40 and jumped 42 inches in the vertical, and I do think Ruggs was well on his way to becoming a star in the NFL. I don't know how good Ruggs would have been, but I do think he would have been a multiple-time 1,000-yard player, and that there was a chance he'd still be playing for the Raiders today. But Henry Ruggs made a poor decision in November of 2021, a very poor decision. He drove drunk and hit another car in excess of speeds over 150 miles per hour and killed a young woman and her dog in the process, and may they both continue to rest in peace. For the sake of this video and ultimately the grading of this selection, this is extremely abnormal due to the rarity of this pick and what transpired after. And because of the circumstances, for the sake of the Raiders, I would be fine with giving this an incomplete grade, but from what the Raiders received on the field, which was 921 receiving yards from a former first-round pick, this is an F. Mekhi Becton was the Jets' first-round pick back in 2020, and once upon a time, Mekhi looked to be a legit franchise left tackle. There were certainly some snaps where he got beat as a rookie, but the play from Mekhi that year was pretty good, all things considered. Unfortunately, Mekhi would go on to play just 1 game in the next 2 years for the Jets, as he suffered a knee injury in Week 1 of the 2021 season against the Panthers, which resulted in cartilage damage that required surgery, and he missed the rest of the year. And in August of 2022, Becton was diagnosed with an avulsion fracture of his right kneecap that ended his 2022 season. It was unfortunate for the obvious reasons, but Becton didn't play good in 2023, and that was the end of his tenure with the Jets. Becton had a good 2024 season with the Eagles that culminated in a Super Bowl victory over the Chiefs, but his play with the Eagles and now Chargers for the next 2 years has nothing to do with the Jets selection. And the reality is, Mekhi Becton was a draft disappointment for the Jets. He's turned his career around since, and I'm happy for him, but this draft grade is based on his performance at the Big Apple, and ultimately that grade is an F. Jedric Wills was the second offensive tackle taken in the 2020 draft, and there was a point in time where Jedric legitimately looked like a franchise tackle of the future. And the 2020 Browns were a really good team, and Wills played a big part within that. Unfortunately, out of the 5 seasons Jedric has played, 2020 was probably the best season he's had, and it's been kind of downhill from there. He was an average to above average tackle as a rookie back in 2020, but given he was 21 years old at the time, the hope was he would eventually become a good or great player, but that never happened. Jedric stayed about the same over the past 4 years when he was on the field, and also committed a frustrating amount of penalties, and was never a particularly dominant player with the Browns. He also has played in just 13 of 34 possible games over the last 2 years, and played in just 58 of 84 possible games for Cleveland during his time there. I thought the flashes were there for Jedric during the early parts of his career, and I thought he would eventually be a Pro Bowl tackle, at least once in his career, but that never happened, and 5 years later, this is a C-. The Jags had 2 first-round picks in the 2020 draft, and the first was used on Florida corner CJ Henderson. Henderson only played in 8 games in his rookie year as he suffered a groin injury in Week 10 of 2020. Unfortunately, this wasn't a case where CJ was a really good player prior to injury, as he was picked on quite a bit as a rookie, and I feel like that should have been expected, given there were no preseason games that year due to COVID, and that a lot of the ironing out part of a rookie corner would have to take place during the regular season. CJ has allowed over a 105 passer rating in every season of his career, and the most surprising part about this pick to me was how quickly the Jags gave up on a former top 10 pick. He was traded in September of 2021 to the Carolina Panthers for a mix of draft picks and tight end Dan Arnold. His contract expired with the Panthers after the 2023 season, and since then he has been a part of the Texans and Steelers practice squads, with Pittsburgh at one point signing him to their active roster, though he never played in an actual game for the Steelers. He played 10 total games for the team that drafted him, and Jags fans unfortunately know how legendarily bad of a draft class this was, and it started with CJ Henderson, an F grade. Isaiah Simmons was a highly sought-after prospect in the 2020 draft that unfortunately never lived up to the hype. With Isaiah Simmons, there were occasional splash plays that would make you think, if he can put this together, he can be a really good player for a long time. I like Simmons a lot as a prospect in the 2020 draft process, and I remember the interception against the Seahawks in his rookie year, and considering the situation in the game at the time, I was very excited for Simmons in the Cardinals, but unfortunately it didn't work out in Arizona, and after the 2022 season, the Cardinals declined his 5th-year option and then traded him to the Giants in August of 2023, and unfortunately the Cardinals only received a 7th-round pick for Simmons, which really surprised me because I thought he would have netted a little more. I think Isaiah Simmons is a really fun player to think about in theory, but he wasn't the best in run defense, and he missed a fair share of tackles during both his tenure with the Cardinals and his tenure with the Giants. He had some production during his time in Arizona, and he's not an all-time whiff by any means, so we are giving this pick a D grade. Derrick Brown of the Carolina Panthers is up, and with the lack of team success the Panthers have had since Brown was drafted, I think it's more than fair to say that people don't realize how good Derrick Brown is. I think he is a tremendously underrated player, and it also doesn't help his case that he only has 8 career sacks, as fair or not. Sacks are the first thing people notice when looking at a defensive trench player. But Derrick Brown set a record for the defensive tackle position in 2023 with tackles in a single season, as he had 103 and made the Pro Bowl. And the Panthers as a team have obviously been down a lot over the past 2 years, although it got better at the end of 2024, but the point is, teams were going to run the football against them a lot more than other contending teams, and we bring this up because Brown only played in 1 game in 2024 as he suffered a meniscus injury, and the Panthers went from 12th in average yards per carry against in 2023 to dead last in 2024. Now, would it be fair to give all of that credit to Derrick Brown individually? No, but the point is, he is a significant difference maker on the field and was every bit worth the number 7 pick. 5 years later, this grade is an A. Justin Herbert was the 3rd quarterback taken in the first 6 picks of the 2020 draft, and through 5 years, Justin Herbert has 5 20-plus passing touchdown seasons, as well as 2 30-plus passing touchdown seasons. He can also scoot out of the backfield and pick up some extra yards on the ground when he needs to, and Herbert has been everything the Chargers could have hoped for when they needed to replace former franchise quarterback Phillip Rivers. This may be surprising because of how watered down the event is, but Justin Herbert is only a one-time Pro Bowler, but has finished in the top 10 of the MVP voting twice in his young career. I fully understand the playoff game against the Texans leaves a bad taste in people's mouths with Herbert at this specific point in time, but I don't think one game should completely diminish everything Herbert has accomplished in his first 5 years and imply he's a bad football player because of that said game. Obviously, he played terrible in his most recent game, but when you select a quarterback in the top 6, you are hoping for what Justin Herbert has accomplished in his first 5 years. And there's a lot of teams that wish they had Justin Herbert as their starting quarterback, an A+ grade. Tua Tagovailoa of the Dolphins is up, and this is one of the more interesting picks to grade for a few reasons. When healthy, Tua can play at a high level as he led the NFL in passing yards in 2023 and led the NFL in several categories in 2022, like yards per attempt, passer rating, and even tied with Patrick Mahomes for touchdown percentage with 6.3%. But Tua is also a very limited player, and you can see that when you watch him, whether it's on tape or just watching him live. He obviously doesn't have the mobility or the arm strength that other quarterbacks in the NFL do, and this causes people to dismiss or at times fail to recognize how good he can be. Tua didn't play the best in 2024, but the team wasn't good, and I do think in a lot of ways that Tua was set up to fail because of the lack of emphasis on the roster in the trenches. This pick, along with the AJ Terrell pick, were two of the more difficult ones to grade from this class because there's a lot of factors for both players. Tua isn't bad, but I think if you go back 5 years and say this is what you're going to get from him, the Dolphins wouldn't be thrilled with their return on investment. But remember, it could be a lot worse. And also remember, Tua himself is not a bad player, he's just not elite. And ultimately 5 years later, we give this pick a B. Andrew Thomas was the Giants' first-round pick, and for those who may not remember, Thomas struggled big time during his rookie season as he allowed 57 pressures and 10 sacks during his rookie year. But since then, he's been a really good player when healthy, and has been everything they could have hoped for and more in a franchise left tackle. For reference, he allowed 57 pressures on 615 pass-blocking snaps as a rookie, and since then, he's allowed 72 pressures on nearly 1,800 pass-blocking snaps. I know a lot of people like to dunk on the Giants, and I get it, but they extended Andrew Thomas prior to his 4th season, and based on where contracts are now, they actually got him on a discount relative to other elite offensive linemen, so credit the Giants for doing so. Now, from a sheer talent perspective, Thomas is an A+ level grade, but the NFL is the ultimate what have you done for me lately league, and unfortunately Thomas has played in just 16 games over the last 2 years. He's played in 61 of 84 possible games, and I hope he's healthy for the 2025 season and beyond, because he is a franchise cornerstone when healthy, but because of this grade is an A. Jeff Okudah was regarded as the best corner prospect since Jalen Ramsey in 2016, and he was selected number 3 overall. Okudah suffered a hamstring injury in training camp of 2020 and missed the first week of the season. Like we said with CJ Henderson, rookie corners especially were at a disadvantage during the 2020 regular season, especially early on because they didn't get the critical preseason reps before the season started, and Okudah, like CJ Henderson, was picked on quite a bit as a rookie. During his first NFL game, which was in week 2 against the Packers, in a year where Aaron Rodgers would go on to throw 48 touchdowns to 5 interceptions, Okudah was targeted 10 times and allowed 7 receptions for 121 yards in his NFL debut. Unfortunately, that would be a sign of things to come, as Okudah never broke out the way he once was expected to. He's never had a good season in the NFL, and he unfortunately tore his Achilles in week 1 of his second season against the 49ers. He was traded to the Falcons for a 5th-round pick prior to the 2023 draft, which ended his tenure in the Motor City. He played the 2023 season with the Falcons, the 2024 season with the Texans, and signed a 1-year deal with the Vikings for the 2025 season. Unfortunately, this grade is an F. Chase Young was a very highly touted prospect coming out of Ohio State and was viewed as the second best pass rushing prospect in the last 10 years, really only behind Myles Garrett of the Browns. And in his rookie year, Chase Young proved why the hype was worth it. He was a Pro Bowler, he won the Defensive Rookie of the Year, and he provided a lot of hope for a fan base that needed it, the then Washington football team. Unfortunately, he had a sophomore slump in 2021 before tearing his ACL and patellar tendon midway through the year and didn't play another game until November of 2022. He was eventually traded to the 49ers in 2023 and is now a member of the New Orleans Saints. Chase Young is not a bad player in 2025, but this grade is based off of his time in Washington, and Chase Young only played in 34 games for Washington and recorded just 14 sacks as a former number 2 pick. He won the Rookie of the Year, and there was production there, so for people to say he's an F and to be in the same tier as other draft busts, to me would not be fair to Chase Young, and because of that, this pick gets a D. Joe Burrow was the first overall pick in the 2020 draft, and this was after a legendary 2019 season with the LSU Tigers as they won the national championship after an all-time season from Burrow and his 2-star receivers in Justin Jefferson and Ja'Marr Chase. Expectations were high for Burrow entering his rookie year, and unfortunately he suffered a torn ACL during the 2020 season, which prematurely ended his rookie year. The Bengals unexpectedly made the Super Bowl in 2021 as Burrow threw 34 touchdowns and won the Comeback Player of the Year award. They made it to the AFC Championship game in 2022, but unfortunately Burrow had another season-ending injury midway through the 2023 season. 2024 was an unreal year for Burrow as he threw for 4,900 yards, led the NFL in several passing categories, and threw a career-high 43 touchdown passes. He is one of the best quarterbacks in the league, and he gives the Bengals a chance to win on any given Sunday. It's hard not to imagine him winning him at least one MVP before his career ends, and I know expectations are high for number 1 overall picks, but I think Joe Burrow has been everything the Bengals could have hoped for and more. An easy A+. Triion Shyena was the Bucs' first-round pick back in 2021, and this was coming off of their dominating Super Bowl performance against the Chiefs. I really liked this pick at the time because I thought the process from GM Jason Light was pretty simple, and it's that we already have a good roster and ultimately pass rush, so why not add to it by bringing in a solid prospect that we'll get to learn from veterans like Shaq Barrett and Jason Pierre-Paul. JPP was 32 at the time and obviously wasn't going to play forever, and this was a good pick to get ahead of a need a year or two in advance. But it doesn't always work out the way you plan, and JTS is a perfect example of this. In 4 years, he had just 15 sacks despite playing in 66 of 68 possible games, and what Bucs fans were frustrated with from Triion Shyena is when he would get in the backfield, he would over-pursue and miss out on the sack. And I do think actually sacking the quarterback is an art, and that sacks do matter to a degree, as sometimes they can be misleading, but unfortunately Triion Shyena couldn't get the job done, at least consistently. He is now a member of the Browns, and this is a C-. Odafe Oweh was the Ravens' second first-round pick during the 2021 draft, and then known as Jason Oweh, was a really raw prospect coming out of Penn State. Like a lot of Penn State prospects, he tested extremely well in the pre-draft process as he was in the 90th percentile or better in every running or jumping drill. He's had 48 or more pressures in 3 of his 4 seasons, which is pretty consistent production, and I do think he's improved every year since entering the league, which specifically for him is huge because he was a project to begin with. He had a career-high 23 quarterback hits in 2024, as well as a career-high 10 sacks, and it is worth noting the Ravens picked up his 5th-year option last year, and that I'm sure both parties will be interested in a contract extension. Oweh has consistently been a good player for the Ravens since being drafted, but never an elite player. He's definitely not in the top 5 or 10 edge rushing conversations, but Oweh will stick around the league for a long time. Having a guy you can pencil in for 45 pressures or more in every season is huge, and I truly think the best is yet to come for him. Lifetime, he has 23 sacks and 7 forced fumbles, and he's been a pretty consistent player, and 4 years later, this is an A-. Greg Rousseau of the Buffalo Bills is up, and Rousseau was recently extended by the Bills as he signed a 4-year, $80 million extension, with 54 being guaranteed. In 4 years, Rousseau has 25 career sacks and has been a really solid player for Buffalo since being drafted. He had a career-high 63 pressures in 2024, which was good for 12th in the NFL. Grading Rousseau is an interesting thought process because Rousseau is a good player, not an elite player that you build a defense around, but a good player, and he's a guy that a lot of teams would love to have, and given what guys like Myles Garrett and Max Crosby have signed extensions for, and recently at that, it's pretty clear Rousseau is not on their level, and while not many players are, you can make a case that Greg Rousseau is pretty much everything the Bills have asked for when they were on the clock back in 2021. If you would have said that we are going to give this guy a second contract, and he will have back-to-back seasons of 55 plus pressures prior to his contract extension, the Bills and every other NFL team would sign up for that. immediately. But because he's not a premier player at the position, the question becomes, how high of a grade can we give this pick? And for me, 4 years later, this pick gets an A-. The Packers selected corner Eric Stokes, and the hope with this pick was that they would have a really good corner duo of Jaire Alexander and Eric Stokes for the next few years. Stokes had a pretty solid rookie season, all things considered, as he played in 16 of 17 possible games, and started 14 of them, and also had 14 pass deflections. But unfortunately, he missed a lot of time over the next 2 years as he suffered an ankle injury in 2022 that limited him to 9 games, and had a hamstring injury in 2023 that limited him to just 3 games. So pretty quickly, Stokes went from a promising rookie corner to a player that played in just 12 of 34 possible games in year 2 and year 3. 2024 was a now or never season for him, and he didn't play bad in 2024, but he didn't play good either. The Packers could have had far worse than Eric Stokes at corner in 2024, and he is now a member of the Raiders. He started 32 games for the Packers over his time there and had a single interception. He would probably be considered a draft disappointment, but as you'll see later in today's video, the Packers could have done a lot worse. 4 years later, this gets a D-. Peyton Turner was the Saints' first-round pick, and the hope for Turner was that he would initially be a Robin to Cam Jordan's Batman, and that he would eventually take over as the team's premier pass rusher. It was also a surprise to a lot of people that Turner went in the first round, and the Saints were betting on his upside. Unfortunately, he only played in 5 games as a rookie, as he suffered a shoulder injury during his rookie year, and was placed on injured reserve. And that would unfortunately be a theme for Turner throughout his Saints tenure, as he only played in 15 of 51 possible games in the first 3 years of his career. 2024 was going to be a season in which he was not just fighting for his job, but for his career, and fortunately he played in 16 games in 2024 and was able to stay healthy for the first time in his career. The problem for the Saints was, even when he was on the field in 2024, Turner wasn't good as he couldn't generate pressure consistently. He missed more tackles than you would like when he was on the field and was a non-impact player. He signed with the Cowboys this offseason and finished his Saints career with less than 700 snaps played and had 5 sacks in 4 seasons, an F grade. Rashod Bateman was the first of 2 first-round picks for the Ravens back in 2021, and when this pick was made, the thought process was that Lamar Jackson was going to have a good receiving duo to throw to for the next several years in Bateman and Hollywood Brown, and even if you want to say trio with Mark Andrews, then you would have a good receiving trio. Bateman didn't have a bad rookie season as he had over 500 yards in limited time, and even had a 100-yard game, and the future looked bright. Hollywood was traded prior to the 2022 season, and it was effectively Bateman's time to shine. Unfortunately, he missed a lot of his second season as he only played in 6 games, and he only hauled in 15 receptions in those 6 games. 2023 was a frustrating year for Bateman as he caught just 32 passes in 16 games and had just 367 yards. Bateman had just 1,167 yards and 4 touchdowns in his first 3 years, but in 2024, he had a career high in receiving yards and touchdowns as he had over 750 yards and 9 touchdowns. Bateman isn't a bad player, but he certainly hasn't lived up to being a first-round pick, as he has less than 2,000 career receiving yards and 13 total touchdowns. This may go up if he has another good year in 2025, because 2024 looked like a legitimate breakout year, but for now, this pick is a C. Greg Newsome of the Browns is up, and the hope for this pick was that Newsome would be a good number 2 corner behind Denzel Ward. This selection was made when the Browns were coming off of a playoff win against the Steelers, and at the time, it looked like they were on the rise in the AFC. Selecting Newsome made a lot of sense because he was a really good corner at Northwestern, and as we know, you can never have enough corner help in today's NFL. He had a bit of a down year in 2024 relative to who he was as a player in the first 3 years of his career, as he had a career high in touchdowns allowed as well as a career high in opposer passer rating when targeted. But for the most part, Newsome has been a viable starting corner since being a first-round pick 4 years ago. He hasn't been elite by any means, but he's been about what you would expect from a number 2 corner in today's era. When push comes to shove, I think the Browns would like to extend him as he will be just 25 years old during the 2025 season. He's not a household name by any means, but he gets the job done. Sure, you can say you would have rather had more from a former first-round pick, but the Browns could have done a lot worse with this selection, a C+ grade. Travis Etienne was the second running back drafted in consecutive picks, and this is a really weird pick to grade for a couple of reasons. Unfortunately, Travis suffered a Liz Frank injury during the 2021 preseason and missed his entire rookie year. It was unfortunate, but injuries are a part of the game, and fortunately, since then, ETN has played in 49 of 51 possible games for the Jags, and the results have been up and down, especially recently. He had back-to-back 1,400 total yard seasons in 2022 and 2023, but his yards per carry took a big turn in the wrong direction from 2022 to where we are today, as he's averaged 3.8 yards per carry or less over the last 2 years. I think two things can be true with ETN, and in 2024 specifically, the offensive line wasn't great, and ETN himself wasn't great either. I also personally think 2025 will be his final year as a Jag. I don't think he's been in a position to maximize his success as a Jag as an NFL player either, and I think the organization in a lot of ways has limited his potential since being drafted. I think the talent is around an A- area, but with where we are today with Travis Etienne and what has been a complicated first 4 years of his career, this grade gets a B-. Naji Harris was the Pittsburgh Steelers' first-round pick, and this isn't the easiest pick to grade for a couple of reasons. If you would have said 4 years ago that Naji would go on to start 68 of 68 possible games over the next 4 years, while rushing for 1,000 yards in every year, and ultimately having over 1,200 total yards in every season too, any team would sign up for that when drafting a running back in the first round. But Naji Harris isn't an elite running back by any means, and lifetime has averaged just 3.9 yards per carry. He's never had double-digit rushing touchdowns in a season, and despite weighing 240 pounds, he doesn't exactly play like a 240-pound running back, meaning he's not as powerful as you would expect. He's not very efficient, he also doesn't have the burst other backs do, and his vision at times isn't great either. Yet, during his time with the Steelers, he pretty much did what was expected of him. This is honestly why I think the Naji Harris selection is one of the more difficult ones to grade, because you can say he's not an elite player, and you would be right, but the production in theory is there. Naji signed with the Chargers this offseason, and 4 years later, this is a B. Christian Darrisaw was the Vikings' first-round pick, and this was after the Vikings traded back with the Jets as they traded up to pick 14 to go get Elijah Vera-Tucker. Darrisaw missed the first few games of his rookie season due to a groin injury, but since he took over the starting job, he's been a really good player for Minnesota. He was playing at a really high level in 2024 before unfortunately suffering a knee injury, which prematurely ended his season. When healthy, Darrisaw is one of the best tackles in the NFL, and prior to the 2024 season starting, the Vikings gave Darrisaw a 4-year extension worth up to $113 million. Despite how good Darrisaw is, he doesn't have any Pro Bowls to his name, which I thought was a tad surprising. I also think it's worth noting that Darrisaw has only played in 48 of 68 possible games, and given that he's missed nearly 30% of his career games, I think that's pretty substantial at this point in his career, as we all know the best ability is availability. The talent is an A+ level, and I think everyone would acknowledge that, but due to the amount of missed games, which we of course hope changes in the near future, this grade is an A. Caleb Farley was a high-risk, high-reward cornerback coming out of Virginia Tech, as there were several injury concerns throughout the pre-draft process that included, but was not limited to, back problems. Unfortunately, Farley suffered a torn ACL in just week 6 of his rookie season, and in week 10 of his second season suffered a herniated disc which prematurely ended year 2. He didn't play at all in 2023, and unfortunately also suffered a personal tragedy prior to the 2023 season, and the Titans released him in August of 2024. Farley was picked up by the Panthers this past year and actually played 9 games for them down the stretch of the 2024 season and started in a game 2. Unfortunately, Caleb Farley only played in 12 games as a Titan and was picked on quite a bit when he was on the field. Whenever you have high-risk players in the draft, there's times where they work out, like Jeffrey Simmons, who suffered an injury in the pre-draft process, and there's times where they don't. I wish the best for Caleb Farley, but unfortunately this pick is an F. Quiddy Pay for the Colts is up, and in a draft class with guys like Micah Parsons, Greg Rousseau, and Jaylen Phillips, you may be surprised to know that Quiddy Pay is actually second in the class in sacks with 26.5 in the first 4 years. Sacks are not everything, but I thought that was interesting in the research for this video, and Colts fans would also be the first to tell you how frustrated they've been with Quiddy Pay at times. Pay had a career-high 37 pressures in 2024, and while that's not bad by any means, it's not what they were envisioning when they were on the clock with the 21st overall pick a couple of years ago. Pay is a pretty solid run defender, and he's an okay number 2 pass rusher. Now, we are far enough into his career at this point to realize who he is as a player and realize he will never be a 65 or 70 pressure a year player consistently that teams legitimately have to game plan around. He will have a role in the NFL for quite some time, but the old saying of about a third of first-round picks are stars, a third are average, and a third are busts applies to Quiddy, with him being an average pass rusher. He's not an awful player, but he's certainly not close to being a top 15 or 20 edge rusher either. But Indy could have done a lot worse with this pick, and 4 years later, this gets a C. Cadarius Tony was the Giants' first-round pick, and obviously we know about Cadarius Tony the player, and he's probably most known for lining up offsides in a regular season game he played for the Chiefs during the 2023 season, but my frustration with this pick wasn't Tony himself going in the first round, it was how the Giants got here to begin with. It was an extremely poor-kept secret that they wanted Devontae Smith, and they not only drafted a bust rather than drafting Devontae Smith, who signed a second contract with the Eagles by the way, but they also had the double whammy of the Eagles trading directly in front of them to go get Devontae Smith. I credit the Giants for acquiring another first-round pick when they were on the clock at pick 11, but this was a poor process to begin with when you think of the simple goal of the NFL draft, which is to acquire as much talent as you can. Tony was eventually traded to the Chiefs midway through his second season, and again, I do credit the Giants for receiving a third-round pick for trading him, and if you want to bump this grade up ever so slightly for the Giants receiving a day 2 pick back for Kadarius Toney, be my guest, but he finished his Giants tenure with 41 receptions for 420 yards and 0 receiving touchdowns as a first-round pick. 4 years later, this is an F. Jamon Davis was the Commanders' first-round pick in 2021, and prior to Jaden Daniels getting to Washington, they were not a good franchise for several reasons, and drafting productive players was one of those reasons. There was a 3-year span where Washington's first-round picks were Jamin Davis, Jahan Dotson, and Emmanuel Forbes, all of which are no longer on the roster, and Davis and Forbes were both flat-out released. Jamin Davis in particular is frustrating because he is a phenomenal athlete even for NFL standards. He's not just an above-average athlete. No, he tested in the 95th percentile or better in the 10-yard split, the 40, the broad jump, and the vertical jump, as he had a 42-inch vertical, which is downright insane. But linebacker is a position where instincts matter more than athleticism, and there's of course a threshold for athleticism, but instincts ultimately matter more, and Jamin Davis is a good example of this. Now, while he is a draft disappointment, he did rack up over 280 tackles, had over 20 TFLs, and started for 2 seasons for Washington, meaning he is far from an F grade, especially compared to some other players in this class, and that's why we ultimately went with a D+. Jaylen Phillips of the Dolphins is up, and I'll be honest, this was one of the more difficult picks to grade because of the volatility within Phillips' short career. For those that may not remember, Jaylen Phillips was forced to medically retire at a point during college, and there was significant risk in drafting Jaylen Phillips. But credit to him, he played all 34 games in the first 2 years of his career and looked like he was a budding star. He had 8.5 sacks as a rookie and had 7 in his second season, but believe it or not, more than doubled his pressures in 2022 despite having less sacks. But 2023 was not a good year for Phillips as he suffered a torn Achilles in the Black Friday game against the Jets, which prematurely ended his season. He had 6.5 sacks in 8 games and looked good, and injuries happened, but he was ready for opening day in 2024. I was ready for Jaylen to have a big year and was rooting for him, but unfortunately he suffered another season-ending injury in Week 4 against the Titans. Phillips has played in just 12 of the last 34 possible games and has now missed 32% of his career games. I'm a huge Jaylen Phillips fan, and based on his talent alone, I think this grade is an A, but I think with injuries factored in, this comes down to a B. Alex Leatherwood was the Raiders' first-round pick, and everyone groaned when this selection was made. Leatherwood himself was not a bad prospect, as he was a consensus early to mid-second round prospect, but why everyone groaned when this pick was made was a clearly better prospect was available at the same position in Christian Darrisaw. Unfortunately, Leatherwood's play during his rookie year confirmed why everyone was upset with the Raiders when this pick was made, as he had one of the worst rookie seasons imaginable. He led the league in pressures allowed back in 2021, as he allowed 65 pressures on 708 pass blocking snaps and also allowed 8 sacks. He had multiple games, as in plural, where he allowed 2 sacks and actually had a game against the Chiefs where he registered a pass blocking grade of 0.0 from PFF. He split time between right tackle and right guard during his rookie year, and it did not work out for the Raiders. Believe it or not, Leatherwood was actually released prior to his second season starting, meaning he wasn't even traded for a 7th round pick. He was flat out released. He has bounced around a few practice squads, but has not played in an NFL game since 2022, and this grade is an F. Zan Collins was the Cardinals' first-round pick in 2021, and we often talk about quarterbacks being victims of franchises failing them as players, or having a GM take a quarterback in a last-gasp effort to save his job, but Zan Collins is in a similar situation as a defensive player. Not with the last-gasp effort to save the GM's job part, but the not having a plan with this player long-term part. Zan Collins has been used in several different ways since being drafted back in 2021, including the first 2 years of his career at middle linebacker, before eventually settling in at edge over the past 2 years. Collins is a really good run-defending edge, and there's a purpose for players like that in the NFL, but drafting a run-setting edge at number 16 overall after he failed at inside linebacker in the first few years of his career is not a good draft process. I credit Jonathan Gannon for getting more out of Zan Collins than the previous regime did, but that doesn't make this pick a good one due to a slight improvement over the past few years. I think Zan Collins has a role in the NFL and will have a role for quite some time, but I also think it's fair to say he was underwhelming as a first-round pick. It's fair to say he's a solid player you'd like to have on your roster, at least where he is now in his career, but it's also fair to say he was not worth the 16th overall pick. 4 years later, this is a C. Mac Jones was the 5th quarterback selected in the first round, and believe it or not, there was a point in time where he looked like he was going to be the best quarterback in this class. He finished second in Offensive Rookie of the Year voting back in 2021 behind Ja'Marr Chase and led the Patriots to a postseason appearance. Sure, they got beat, and even killed by Buffalo in the 2021 wildcard round, but the future looked bright for Mac and the Patriots. There was a very real thought at a time that they were going to transition from Tom Brady to Mac Jones, and yes, there was a year in between the two, but the thought was that Bill Belichick had his quarterback of the future. Unfortunately, that unraveled pretty quick, and over the next 2 years, Mac was just 8-17 as a starter, and in those 25 games, threw 24 touchdowns to 23 interceptions. The Patriots knew they had to do something at the quarterback position entering the 2024 offseason, and they eventually drafted Drake May. We obviously know the Mac Jones era ended on a sour note, but I don't think this grade is as simple as he's not good now and this is an F. This will also apply to another player later in the video. Mac looked really good in his rookie year at times, and while that obviously didn't last, that does count for something, and he played a big part in the Patriots' most recent postseason appearance. 4 years later, this is a D. The Jets traded up with the Vikings from pick 23 for their second first-round pick of the night, which was USC offensive lineman Alijah Vera-Tucker. I liked AVT a lot as a prospect, as I thought he was a really good player, and a guy who could start at any guard or tackle position, regardless of side, and be good to go. And through 4 years, he's played at every position along the offensive line outside of center. Unfortunately, Vera-Tucker has yet to play in a full 17-game season, though he played in at least 15 games twice. He suffered a torn triceps back in 2022 and had an Achilles injury in 2023, which prematurely ended his second and third seasons in the NFL. 2024 was a now or never year for Vera-Tucker, and he played really good for the Jets this past year. Now, as we often discuss on the channel, availability is the best ability, and unfortunately AVT has only played in 43 of 68 possible career games, meaning he's missed 37% of all games since he was drafted. Injuries are unfortunately a part of the game, and I think this has to be factored into the grade. AVT was a bright spot for the Jets this past year, and I do think he is a Pro Bowl level talent when healthy, or an A level talent from a grade perspective, and hope he has continued success, but when you factor everything in with this pick 4 years later, this is a B. Rashaan Slater was the second tackle off the board in 2021, and I really liked this pick at the time for a few reasons. I thought Slater was an elite left tackle prospect, and that both his tape and pre-draft measurements backed it up. Benching 33 reps while having a 94th percentile 10-yard split, as well as a 94th percentile short shuttle, alleviated any concerns I had about his arm length. Not only that, but I really liked the idea of drafting your franchise quarterback and your franchise left tackle in back-to-back drafts. Both both players are young and can grow together, and more often than not, both Slater and Justin Herbert play well, and as we saw in 2024, it resulted in a lot more wins. Unfortunately, Slater tore his biceps just a few games into the 22 season and missed most of the year, but he bounced back in a big way in 23 and especially 2024, as he had the best year of his career and made his second career Pro Bowl. Rashaan Slater has not signed his contract extension yet, but when we discuss teams bringing in offensive linemen through free agency or trade, and discuss how great offensive linemen usually don't leave their teams until they're well into their 30s, that applies directly to Rashaan Slater. As long as he stays healthy, he should be the Charger starting left tackle for the next 4 or 5 years, and that's not an exaggeration to say. He does a good job both in the pass and run game, and this is an A+. Micah Parsons was the Cowboys' first-round pick, and in 2024 he became the 4th player ever to record 10-plus sacks in each of the first 4 years of his career. And over the last 2 years, Parsons ranks first in pressure rate, pass rush win rate, and is also first in double teams. Micah finished second in the Defensive Player of the Year voting in each of the first 2 years of his career, and finished third in 2023 before unfortunately missing 4 games this past year, in a year where he still recorded 12 sacks and made the Pro Bowl. I know people love getting their jokes in about the Cowboys and the NFC Championship game streak, but Parsons is far from the problem. He led the NFL in pressures in 2023 with 103, and was tied with 49ers pass rusher Nick Bosa back in 2022, as they each had 90, which also led the league. For reference, he finished 9th in 2021 as a rookie, and to at least be fair to Micah, he was used in a completely different way his rookie year, yet still finished top 10 in pressures. And for reference, he finished 7th in 2024 despite missing 4 games. Parsons is a game wrecker, and in 4 years, he's a 4-time Pro Bowler and a 3-time All-Pro, and is just 25 years old. This is Hall of Fame production, and I'd be pretty surprised if he does not win a Defensive Player of the Year before it's all said and done, an A+. Justin Fields for the Bears is up, and obviously we all know he is no longer a Bear, but I don't think the grade for this pick is as simple as the thought process of he didn't work out as a first-round quarterback, so it's automatically an F. There were some incredibly fun times for Bears fans when Justin Fields was the quarterback. Obviously, there were a lot more losses than they would have liked, as Justin finished his Bears tenure with a 10-28 record as the team starting quarterback, but he ran for over 1,100 yards in 2022 and had 25 total touchdowns that year. I think both things can be true regarding the Justin Fields situation, where the organization failed him and he also didn't live up to being a first-round pick. His situation was not ideal entering his rookie year, as everyone knew the GM and head coach were both on the hot seat, and they were fired after his rookie season. Ryan Poles more or less opted to openly tank down the stretch of the 22 season, and obviously that didn't do Justin any favors either. Unfortunately for Justin, the Panthers had the worst record in the league in 2023, which gave the Bears the opportunity to draft Caleb Williams #1 overall. If Justin was this no doubt franchise-changing quarterback, they obviously wouldn't have selected Caleb Williams and would have traded down again. But it's also fair to say that Justin was nowhere close to the levels of some other quarterbacks that have been draft busts. 4 years later, this is a C-. Heisman-winning receiver Devontae Smith was the 3rd receiver taken in the top 10 picks of the 2021 draft, and Smitty has been a really good receiver for the Birds. Obviously, with all of the success Saquon Barkley had in 2024, and Jalen Hurts rushing for another 14 touchdowns too, somebody had to take a backseat in the 2024 Eagles offense. Devontae missed a few games, so that is absolutely worth noting, but had career lows in both targets and receiving yards this year. Now, unfortunately for Devontae, from a personal standpoint, another 2021 receiver in Ja'Marr Chase had a huge 2024 season, which brings up the question of how should Devontae Smith be graded with a generational receiver in the same class. This is a challenge, but what has to be remembered is Smitty has over 4,000 career receiving yards and has 2 1,000-yard seasons to his name. This may come as a surprise because of how watered down the game has become, but Devontae also has never made the Pro Bowl. I love this selection when it was made because the Eagles actually jumped the Giants to make this pick and ensure a division rival didn't get him in the process, but I don't think Devontae is a top 5 or 10 receiver in the league. He's a really good player, and I think he's been pretty close to everything the Eagles could have asked for, and 4 years later, this is an A-. Pat Surtain II is up, and he was the second corner taken in the 2021 draft and was the second corner taken in consecutive picks. Surtain was a really highly regarded prospect throughout the 2021 pre-draft process and was a consensus first-round pick. The only question was where he would go and which team would be getting a really good corner prospect from day one. Denver was ultimately the team, and in 4 years, Surtain is a 3-time Pro Bowler, a 2-time first-team All-Pro, and now, after the 2024 season, a Defensive Player of the Year award winner. Surtain has 11 career interceptions and 2 seasons with 4 interceptions, as he had 4 interceptions all the way back in his rookie season, which also included a pick 6 from division rival Justin Herbert. He's incredibly durable, as he's played in 66 of 68 possible career games. He eliminates opposing teams' #1 receivers, and I asked Broncos fan Brandon Perna prior to the 2024 season if he was the best corner in football, to which he replied, without even having to think about it, yeah, easy. And that describes this pick. The Broncos are on the way back up, and obviously Bo Nix and Sean Payton have a lot to do with it, but so does a 24-year-old corner in their prime. An easy A+. J.C. Horn was the first corner off the board, and I think the best way to describe this pick 4 years later is complicated. J.C. Horn has only played in 13 games or more in 2 of his 4 seasons, but when he's played, he's been good. Really good, but one of the reasons this pick is complicated is because of how good the pick immediately after J.C. Horn is in Pat Surtain. It adds to this pick because it's not an exaggeration to say that Surtain is on a Hall of Fame trajectory for the Broncos, while J.C. Horn has only played in 37 of 68 possible career games. And no matter how good you are, if you miss 46% of your career games, that's going to factor into the draft grade, fair or not. If you watched any Panthers games in 2024, specifically when they were on defense, then you know this was not a talented group, and to be fair, they had several injuries, including a big win to defensive tackle Derrick Brown. But J.C. Horn was one of the very few bright spots on a bad defense this past year, and he's been a bright spot for Carolina when he's played in his young career. We, of course, wish J.C. the best moving forward, and also wish him a huge congratulations on the contract extension, and hope he stays healthy more than he has in the first few years of his career. Based on talent alone, this grade would be an A, but because he's missed so much time in his career, unfortunately, this gets brought down to a B-. Penei Sewell was one of the best tackle prospects over the past several years, and he's played like it through the first 4 years. One of the craziest things to me with Penei when he was a draft prospect was how complete of a player he was while being just 20 years old. He didn't turn 21 until October of his rookie year, and this was the definition of a great player falling into the Lions' lap, and 4 years later, the Lions have reaped the benefits of drafting Penei Sewell. He played both left tackle and right tackle during his rookie year, and even kicked over to the left side a bit during the 2023 season, but throughout the draft process, you often hear the phrase that a guy is a plug-and-play player for several years, and Penei Sewell is that guy. He's a 3-time Pro Bowler and a 2-time first-team All-Pro, and this is before his 25th birthday. One of the knocks on Bo Nix and Michael Penix during last year's pre-draft process was that they were older prospects, and despite being drafted 3 years earlier, Penei Sewell is several months younger than both guys. The Lions gave him a 4-year contract extension worth over $110 million, and Penei is one of the biggest reasons, no pun intended, as to why the Lions have been so successful over the past few years. He's a kick rear ends and take names later kind of player. This is an easy A+. Jaylen Waddle was the Dolphins' first-round pick, and they acquired this selection from the Eagles after trading back with the 49ers, then traded back up to go get Alabama receiver Jaylen Waddle. Waddle, like a lot of Dolphins in 2024, had a really down year, as he had career lows across the board. As in everything. Targets, receptions, yards, and touchdowns, as he only had 2 touchdowns in all of 2024. Jaylen had a really good second season back in 2022, as he had over 1,300 yards and 8 touchdowns, and given that it was the first year under Mike McDaniel, it was easy to project a very high future for Jaylen and the Dolphins. But unfortunately, the last 2 years haven't been particularly kind to Jaylen on the field for several reasons, whether it was his starting quarterback missing games, or him just not getting the football as much as he should. But because he has over 4,100 receiving yards in the first 4 years of his career, you can argue he's been everything the Dolphins could have hoped for when they made this pick, which makes this difficult to grade. He also set a franchise record for most receiving yards in the first 4 seasons of a career, and I think Jaylen will bounce back in 2025 and be a 1,000-yard receiver for the 4th time in 5 years. This is an A-. Former LSU wide receiver Ja'Marr Chase was drafted 5th overall by the Bengals, and this paired him with his college quarterback Joe Burrow. A lot of people hate this word, but it was certainly fair to use for Ja'Marr Chase, and it's that he was a generational prospect. And he was. He ran a 4.34 40, jumped 41 inches in the vertical, had an 11-foot broad jump, and benched 225 23 times at just 201 pounds. He was the best receiver to come out since Julio Jones back in 2011, and he's played like it through the first 4 years. He set an NFL record back in 2021 for most receiving yards in a year for a rookie, that includes the postseason, as well as the most receiving yards in a single game, and was the youngest NFL player with multiple 100-yard receiving games in a single postseason, and the most receiving yards in a single game was for rookies. He won the Triple Crown in 2024 as he would go on to have a 127-catch, 1,708-yard, 17-touchdown season, and was the best receiver in football this past year. Ja'Marr Chase and Micah Parsons are the only two players to be able to say this from the 2021 draft class, but they are both already 4-time Pro Bowlers. Ja'Marr is only 25 years old and will undoubtedly be getting paid soon, and the only question is, especially with the salary cap going up year by year, is how much. 46 touchdowns in 4 years is downright insane, and he is a franchise cornerstone. This pick could not have worked out better, and it's an A+. Kyle Pitts of the Falcons is up, and this is a tough pick to grade for several reasons. Pitts obviously had a tremendous rookie season back in 2021 as he became the second rookie tight end to ever have 1,000 yards in his rookie year. Brock Bowers, of course, became the third in 2024. Now, people talk about the Atlanta Falcons passing on Ja'Marr Chase to draft Kyle Pitts, but it was not egregious at the time. Hindsight is, of course, 2020, but Kyle Pitts was a very, very rare prospect. He was 6'6", 245, had a 98th percentile wingspan, which obviously helps for catching passes, and for that matter, a 93rd percentile hand size too. Oh, and he ran a 4.44 40. That was the definition of a built-in-a-lab prospect, and he played like it in his rookie year. He had a down year in 2022 and also got hurt, but over the last 2 years, had over 600 yards in each season and finished 11th in receiving yards for tight ends in 2023 and 13th in 2024. I think there's a misconception as to who Kyle Pitts is as a player, and people make him out to be like he's an all-time bust, but he's not. Sure, he's underwhelming for a top 4 pick, and I wouldn't argue that, but having nearly 200 receptions and nearly 2,700 receiving yards is a lot different than taking a Treylon Burks or Jaylen Regger in the first round for reference. I understand one was selected in the top 4 and the others mentioned were picks 18 and 21, but Kyle Pitts is not a bust the way people want to make him out to be. He's not a hit, but he's not a bust either, and 4 years later, this is a C+. The San Francisco 49ers traded a fortune to go up and get North Dakota State quarterback Trey Lance as they sent their 2021 first-round pick, their 2022 and 2023 first-round picks, as well as a third-round pick in 2022 to secure their franchise quarterback. The trade made a lot of sense at the time as they were coming off of a bad season in 2020, as they had countless season-ending injuries, unfortunately similar to the 2024 season, and they figured that they weren't going to be selecting this high again for quite some time, and that they should go up and get their guy in a loaded quarterback class. And to be completely honest, I agree with the thought process, but Trey Lance did not work out for the 49ers, not even close, and in a lot of ways, you can argue that Brock Purdy saved both Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch's jobs, but in Lance's 49ers career, he threw just 102 passes and threw just 5 touchdowns to 3 interceptions. With the 49ers coming off of an NFC Championship game appearance in Brock Purdy's rookie year, they had a decision to make, and that decision was to either roll with Brock Purdy or to admit they made a mistake with this pick and to move on, despite how much draft capital was invested. And needless to say, the Trey Lance selection did not work out, an F grade. Zach Wilson was the number 2 pick, and there are a lot of Jets fans still mad to this day, rightfully so might I add, that they beat the Rams in Week 15 of the 2020 season. They were 0-13 at the time, and Jets fans were hoping they would go 0-16 so they could get the best quarterback prospect since Andrew Luck in Trevor Lawrence. Now, unfortunately, Zach Wilson didn't work out as the Jets starting quarterback, as during his time with the team, he was 12-21 as a starter, threw more interceptions than touchdowns, and there were countless bad moments during his time in the Big Apple. What was incredibly frustrating about Wilson, aside from, well, a lot of things, was just how often he took sacks during his time in New York. He took forever to throw as the game was far too fast for him, and his pressure to sack ratio was incredibly high, meaning he couldn't escape pressure and got himself into a lot of bad situations. I thought the Jets did everything they reasonably could to give him a chance to be the guy, especially entering his second year. Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall in one draft is a great haul and one that any team would take, but it didn't matter much when Wilson couldn't produce. The hope was for him to develop behind Aaron Rodgers in 2023, and that maybe we would see him become a better player down the road, but that thought process ended pretty quickly. He was traded to the Broncos prior to the 24 season, and I think we know what draft grade is coming, an F. Trevor Lawrence was the number 1 pick in the 2021 draft, and the hype around Lawrence as a prospect was the most we've seen since Andrew Luck. Unfortunately, Trevor didn't have a good start to his career for several reasons, and it was due in large part to the organization failing him from the start. Whether it was Urban Meyer as his head coach, or his top 3 receivers in his rookie year being Marvin Jones, Laviska Shenault, and Laquan Treadwell, the 4th was Dan Arnold if you were wondering, and needless to say it was a long year for the Jags. Things turned around in 2022 and even for a good chunk of 2023 as they started out 8-3 before losing several games down the stretch, which carried into 2024. Trevor Lawrence has not been the number 1 pick that he was hyped to be, and I fully acknowledge that, but I also think it's fair to say the Jags have done a tremendous job in limiting his success. Again, Trevor isn't completely innocent within all of this, but this has been a tough situation from the minute he was drafted. I love the future with him, Liam Cohen, and especially Brian Thomas Jr., and I do believe the best is yet to come. Remember, he is only 25 years old, but for being as highly touted of a prospect as he was, and for him throwing just 69 touchdowns in 4 years, along with a 22-38 record in his first 4 years, well, there needs to be a lot of context around this grade, but ultimately, this pick gets a B. The Minnesota Vikings traded back from pick 12 with the division rival Lions and drafted Georgia safety Lewis Cine with their first-round pick. Unfortunately, Cine broke his leg during his rookie season in just week 4 in a special teams play, and his season was over. Injuries are unfortunately a part of football, and everyone was hoping he could be a starter in 2023 and forget what happened during his rookie season. But that never happened, and pretty quickly Lewis Cine became forgotten about and he became a complete whiff of a first-round pick. He played 10 total defensive snaps for the Vikings before being released in final cuts during the 2024 preseason, and since has played for the Bills and Eagles. He finished his Vikings tenure with 1 total tackle, and I don't think this is an exaggeration to say this is pretty close to an all-time draft bust. Not surprisingly, this is an F grade. Dax Hill of the Bengals is up, and when this pick was made, it was supposed to be a developmental pick with the intentions to eventually replace Jessie Bates. Unfortunately for the Bengals, Jessie Bates is one of the best safeties in the league and was immediately named a second-team All-Pro in his first year with the Falcons in 2023, and had another 4 interceptions in 2024, and has been one of the very few bright spots for the Falcons defense over the past few years. In a lot of ways, this pick reminds me of the A.J. Brown Treylon Burks selection, which we'll get to later in the video, where the Bengals thought it would be a seamless transition to replace a great player. Obviously, this selection isn't talked about as much, but the concept applies. Unfortunately, Dax Hill tore his ACL in week 5 of the 2024 season, and he played sparingly in his rookie year back in 2022, so we only have about a year and a quarter worth of football from Dax Hill since being a first-round pick 3 years ago. He made the transition from safety to corner from 23 to 24, and I thought he looked good when he was on the field in 2024. I think this is one of the most difficult picks to grade from this draft because a lot of Hill's situation has been out of his control. I do think the talent is probably close to a B or B+ level based on what we've seen, but I don't think the organization did him any favors from the start. This grade gets a C-. George Karlaftis of the Chiefs is up, and I like this selection when it was made because of what it would represent for George. This applies anytime a player is selected to a team with a Chris Jones, or really anytime there is already a premier defensive lineman or edge rusher on the team, but the reality is for George is he was never going to be the main focus of the opposing offensive line, and that favors him in a lot of situations by having a teammate like Chris Jones, and in 3 years, Karlaftis has 24.5 sacks and has been a really key contributor for the Chiefs. Chiefs. He had a 3-sack game this past postseason against the Texans, and believe it or not, has 8 sacks in 10 career postseason games just 3 years into his career. He has back-to-back seasons with 60 or more pressures, and he was drafted at just 21 years old, so believe it or not, Karlaftis is still younger than some 2025 NFL draft prospects. I don't think he is a premier edge rusher by any means, and I think Chiefs fans would agree with that, but he has one double-digit sack season and has continuously been a key contributor in January. I think he will receive a contract extension from the Chiefs when the time comes, and after an A grade last year, he gets another A grade this year. Cole Strange was the Patriots' first-round pick, and I didn't like this pick from the minute it was made for a few reasons. I didn't like the process for the Patriots, who had the 21st pick and traded out of this pick so the Chiefs could get a consensus top 15 player in the draft in Trent McDuffie, while New England traded back to draft a player who was widely viewed as a third-round pick. Rams coach Sean McVay laughed at the selection and basically said he was a guy they were looking at because he thought he would be available late on day 2 when they were on the clock. As cliche as it sounds, the selection of Cole Strange was a very strange selection, and unfortunately he has only played in 13 games over the last 2 years. The best ability in the NFL is, of course, availability, and even when he plays, it's not like he is a game-changing guard that other teams fear when he's on the field. I do think he'll stick around the league for some time, but this pick received a lot of rightful criticism at the time, and through 3 years, the criticism has proven to be warranted. The Patriots have been a bad team over the last couple of seasons, and it's because of decisions like this. 3 years later, this is an F. Devonte Wyatt was the Packers' second first-round pick of the night, with the other being linebacker Quay Walker, and this was an all-around frustrating draft process for the Packers because they desperately needed a receiver entering the 2022 draft, yet used both of their first-round picks on defensive players. Devonte Wyatt was also an older prospect as he was 24 during his rookie season, and anytime you have an older prospect, you expect to see production pretty early because a lot of the time, though not every time, they are more physically developed and mature for that matter too. Wyatt didn't play much during his rookie year, but stepped up in his second year as he had over 40 pressures from the interior before having a bit of a regression in 2024 as he finished the year with just 23 total tackles in 14 games. Now, you can look at him as having 5 sacks in year 3 through rose-colored lenses, but I don't think that would justify this pick. He has just 5 starts in 3 years, and I thought he was trending in the right direction entering 2024, but did not take the next step. He also missed some time in 2024, and this is a player who has played more than 400 snaps in a season just once in 3 years. He will be 27 during the 2025 season, and 3 years later, this is a C. Jags linebacker Devin Lloyd is up, and the Jags traded up to get Lloyd through a trade with the Bucs. Lloyd has over 110 tackles in each of the first 3 years of his career, and overall there's been a lot more good than bad. I really think Lloyd has improved over the last 2 years of his career, and it's shown. The one big knock with him that Jags fans get frustrated with is he gets beat in coverage at times, and at times it can be pretty bad on tape, but he also does a lot of things right. He's a really good run-stopping linebacker, he can get after the quarterback when they need him to, and I don't think he gets as much credit as he should. I think he is an above-average linebacker and gets far too criticized at times for what can be a near impossible job, which of course is coverage as an NFL linebacker. There's also times where the Jags certainly don't do him any favors, and it also shows on tape. I know the coverage woes can be pretty frustrating, but I like him, and I think this was a pretty good draft pick, and 3 years later, this is a B+. Jermaine Johnson was the Jets' third first-round pick of the night, as Sauce Gardner and Garrett Wilson were each selected in the top 10 of the 2022 draft. Johnson was a part of an insane draft for the Jets, in which they also selected running back Breece Hall early in the second round. The plan was to bring Jermaine along slowly in his rookie year and have him be a rotational guy early on, and have him eventually be a starter and a guy who can legitimately get after the quarterback in year 2 and beyond. Credit to the Jets, because that was exactly what they did. He became a Pro Bowler in 2023 as he had over 50 pressures, had 16 quarterback hits, and had 7.5 sacks. Unfortunately, Johnson suffered a torn Achilles in week 2 of the 2024 season and missed the rest of the year. Admittedly, this is a pretty tricky pick to grade because year 1 was kind of a wash and year 2 was a really good year, and ultimately a glimpse of the player I think Jermaine Johnson will be if he can stay healthy. but we are 3 years in with a former first-round pass rusher that has played just 33 career games and has 10 career sacks. I have praised the Jets' 2022 draft countless times, and Jermaine certainly plays a part within that. From a sheer talent level, I really think Jermaine is an A-level talent, and when healthy is everything the Jets could have hoped for when they were on the clock. But because of the lack of production, at least to the level you'd like, a lot of which is out of Jermaine's control, we are going to give this a B grade. Tyler Linderbaum was the Ravens' second first-round pick of the night, as the other was safety Kyle Hamilton, and I really do think the 2022 first round is a good summarization of the Ravens as a franchise. They traded former receiver Hollywood Brown and drafted an All-Pro in Kyle Hamilton, and they traded back a few spots with Buffalo later in the first round, and drafted a multiple-time Pro Bowler to man their trenches for a long time. Tyler Linderbaum was regarded as one of the best players throughout the draft process, but fell down the board due to his positional value. And 3 years later, there are a lot of teams that wish they would have just stayed put and took what was a non-sexy pick in the first round and called it a day. Whenever you think of the Baltimore Ravens, you probably think of Lamar Jackson or even Derrick Henry, but there's no doubt Linderbaum makes Lamar's job easier, and he is an extremely pivotal player to their success. He has not allowed a sack since his rookie season, which is now over 1,100 pass blocking snaps per PFF, and given that he did that at just 23 and 24 years old, I think he's more than here to stay. There's a reason they say to draft Iowa offensive linemen, and he and Bucs tackle Tristan Worfs are shining examples. This was a tremendous draft process by a really well-run organization, and this is an A+. Tyler Smith was a player I liked a lot in the pre-draft process, as I thought his game would translate very favorably to the NFL level, and I thought whichever team drafted him would be getting a good football player, whether it was at guard or tackle. He's a really explosive athlete for his size, and 3 years in, he's already a multiple-time Pro Bowler and was a second-team All-Pro in 2023. I know people like to mock the Cowboys and get their jokes in about the NFC Championship game streak and all of that, but believe it or not, they do a lot of things well as a franchise. And having a 3-year run of first-round picks in CeeDee Lamb, Micah Parsons, and Tyler Smith is a good example of that. And when push comes to shove, they should extend all three players because all three are very good at what they do, and they've already extended CeeDee Lamb, of course. I personally don't think Tyler Smith will ever be in the conversation for best guard in football, but he's an invaluable player to the Cowboys, and 3 years later, this is an A+. Bills corner Kaiir Elam is up, and I know this pick is tough to look back on for Bills fans, specifically because their buddies in Kansas City took Trent McDuffie just 2 picks prior to taking Elam, and Trent, of course, would become a multiple-time All-Pro. Kaiir Elam, on the other hand, has been a healthy scratch multiple times, and he became more of a special teams player this past year. He played significant time in the final few games defensively due to injuries ahead of him on the depth chart, and as a third-year player that's a former first-round pick, that's what you need to know about this selection. Now, I know you may be thinking this is an automatic F grade, and I would understand why, as Kaiir has been a healthy scratch and has only played in 29 career games, but Elam had an interception against the Dolphins in the playoffs in 2022, when Buffalo was losing, that gave them the ball on Miami's 33-yard line, and they took the lead in the second half of the game. He also had an interception in the 2023 playoffs when the Steelers were in the red zone, and 2 playoff interceptions in games Buffalo, and especially a game-changing interception in 2022, is more than nothing. And this doesn't change the grade to a B or anything crazy, but I did at least want to note that. And because of the playoff contributions, we are going to bump this to a D. Quay Walker was the first of 2 Packers first-round picks, as this was the offseason they traded Davante Adams to the Raiders. Quay has racked up a lot of tackles since becoming a Packer, as he's had over 100 tackles in each of the first 3 years of his career, despite missing a few games in each of the last 2 years, but that doesn't mean he's particularly great. Quay tested pretty well during the pre-draft process, as he had a 4.52 40, which was in the 90th percentile for the linebacker position, and also tested in the 78th percentile in the broad jump. He's a really good athlete at nearly 6'4", 240, but that doesn't always translate to being a good linebacker. And with the pre-draft process going on for the 2025 draft right now, I don't think 40 times mean that much for linebackers, and I think Quay is a good example why. There's thresholds, of course, but a lot of the time it's about instincts, and I don't think Quay reads the game particularly well, and I know Packers fans get pretty frustrated with Walker at times too. The flashes are certainly there, and there's times where Quay will go a few games in a row where he looks like a pretty good player, but he's not consistent, and I think this is who he is as a player 3 years into his career, a C grade. The Kansas City Chiefs traded up to pick 21 to get Washington corner Trent McDuffie, who surprisingly fell down the board. I thought McDuffie was a consensus top 15 player, and I think the Chiefs trading up to go get McDuffie and the Patriots trading back so they could draft a third-round guard at pick 29 perfectly describes the direction each franchise has taken over the past few years. McDuffie is a two-time All-Pro and is a two-time Super Bowl champion, and as crazy as this is going to sound, experienced the first playoff loss of his career in February of 2025. The Chiefs had 2 first-round picks in 2022, and they hit on each of them in George Karlaftis and Trent McDuffie. The Chiefs' success over the past few years has not happened by accident, and it's due in large part to extremely successful drafting in back-to-back years in 2021 and 2022. We have talked about not overthinking the good players in draft classes before, and this certainly applied to McDuffie in 2022. Now, I'd be lying if I said I thought he would be a two-time All-Pro in the first 3 years of his career, but he played a tremendous part in the Chiefs winning back-to-back Super Bowls in 2022 and 2023. His most iconic play at this point is probably the deflection in Super Bowl 58 in a win over the 49ers, and 3 years later, this is an A+. Super Bowl champion quarterback Kenny Pickett is up, and he was the Steelers' first-round pick in hopes he could be the successor to Ben Roethlisberger. The hope was Kenny would go from leading the Pitt Panthers to a wildly successful 2021 season to bringing the Steelers back to being legitimate postseason contenders year in and year out, and that the Steelers' 2022 draft class, led by Pickett and second-round receiver George Pickens, would be a great quarterback and receiver duo for the next several years. And you can even add in Naji Harris and Pat Freiermuth too from the 2021 class. I didn't think Pickett's rookie season was all that bad, as his offensive line wasn't great, and he led multiple game-winning drives, and I thought once there was some stability that he would be alright in 2023. I like Kenny heading into the 23 season because the flashes were there, but the consistency was never there, and that's ultimately what came back and bit Kenny in the rear end. He would make a good play and follow it up with misreading plays or receivers not being open or flat-out bad decisions. He finished his Steelers tenure with 13 touchdowns to 13 interceptions before being traded to the Eagles last offseason. The Steelers spent a first-round pick on a quarterback that did not work out, and this pick is an F. Trevor Penning is up, and this was a pick I did not like from the beginning, due in large part to the process of this selection. The Saints determined they had to have a second first-round pick in 2022, and to make a long story short, this is how the Eagles acquired Jalen Carter in the 2023 draft. They had the long-term vision to be patient with the process, and the results for each franchise speak for themselves. Penning suffered a torn ligament in his foot before his rookie season began, which limited his time in his rookie year, and was benched in 2023 nearly midway through the year. With veteran Ryan Ramczyk out for 2024 and the Saints spending their 2024 first-round pick on Talisi Fuaga, Penning got his chance to start at right tackle this past year, and it was bad. He allowed over 50 pressures, had 13 penalties, and was a net negative for a team selecting inside the top 10 of the 2025 draft. I was hoping Trevor Penning would prove me wrong, as I also wasn't the biggest fan of him as a prospect, and much preferred Tulsa's Tyler Smith, who eventually went to Dallas, but this pick was bad from the start. The process was bad. He unfortunately sustained an injury which limited most of his rookie year. He was benched in his second year, and he did not play good in his third year. And here we are 3 years later, and this pick is an F. The Tennessee Titans traded A.J. Brown to the Eagles for the 18th pick in the first round, as well as a third-round pick too. Ironically, Treylon Burks' pro comparison throughout the draft process was A.J. Brown, and after seeing the Vikings trade Stephon Diggs, then draft Justin Jefferson, Tennessee quickly found out it's a lot easier said than done in terms of replacing an all-pro caliber talent. In 3 years, Treylon Burks has just 699 career receiving yards, a mark A.J. Brown had hit for the Eagles by Week 9 of the 2022 season. It's unfortunate this pick didn't work out because the opportunity was more than there for Treylon, as the Titans receiving room hasn't exactly been good over the past few years. Burks was the 6th receiver taken in the first round of the 2022 draft, and unfortunately was the least productive of the 6, and it's even more embarrassing for the Titans that A.J. Brown has been such a good player for the Birds since this trade was made. And since this trade was made, A.J. Brown has 2 Super Bowl appearances to Treylon Burks' 1 career touchdown. And as you can probably guess, this pick is an F. Zion Johnson was the Chargers' first-round pick back in 2022, and Zion was an incredible athlete coming out of Boston College. He tested in the 88th percentile or better in the vertical jump, broad jump, 3-cone drill, short shuttle, and the bench press. He also had 34-inch arms, which is a positive, and was a really clean prospect. He's had a lot of ups and downs as an NFL player, and I think the best way to describe Zion Johnson as an NFL player is consistently inconsistent. I really think he's the type of player where he'll have a few good games, and you'll hype him up to your friends about him being a good player, and then he has a really bad game or an incredibly bad rep that everyone sees, and that's kind of how the first 3 years have played out. In terms of actual talent, I do think Zion Johnson is pretty easily in the upper half of the league when he's at his best, but he's not consistent at all, and he's allowed 33 or more pressures in every year since being drafted and has been an incredibly up and down player. It wouldn't surprise me at all if he put it all together one year and eventually made a Pro Bowl because the flashes are there, but the consistency is not, and 3 years later this is a C. Jahan Dotson was the 16th pick in the first round back in 2022, and I didn't like this pick from the beginning, not because I didn't like Dotson as a prospect, but because I didn't like how the Commanders went about this selection. They had the 11th pick and then traded back with New Orleans, who traded up to go get Chris Olave, and Washington traded back only to draft an inferior player at the same position, and having a duo of Chris Olave and Terry McLaurin would be a lot better than what they currently have, and I thought this long before Jahan Dotson became an Eagle. During Dotson's time in Washington, he had 1,041 yards in 2 years and had 11 total touchdowns as a first-round pick. The production wasn't good, and there was a reason they were willing to move on from him prior to the 2024 season starting. Admittedly, I was soured on this pick from the start, but his career high in receiving yards is just 523, and his career high in receptions is just 49. I wish the best for Jahan Dotson moving forward, but it is important to know we are grading the Washington part of this selection. He wasn't an all-time bust by any means, but this pick was disappointing, and 3 years later, this pick gets a D. Guard Kenyon Green was the Texans' second first-round pick of the night, and Kenyon struggled back in 2022, and I was hoping that 2022 would prove to be a transition period for him because he was a 21-year-old rookie at the time. We've brought up countless times on the channel that there is a major difference between playing collegiate linemen every Saturday and playing grown men on Sundays, both from a strength profile and from a technique profile. I was hoping Kenyon could right the ship in 2023, but unfortunately he suffered a shoulder injury in the final preseason game of 2023 and missed the entire year. So pretty quickly, 2024 became a now or never year for him, and he did not play well. He was a big part of the Texans' interior offensive line struggling, and he allowed 5 sacks in 2024, unlimited pass blocking snaps, and also had 7 penalties. I would be pretty surprised if he makes the 2025 Texans roster at this point, and the only thing that would keep him around is the fact he'll be just 24 at the start of the 25 season, meaning he is still younger than some draft prospects this year. I wish Kenyon the best, but 3 years later, this is an F. Kyle Hamilton was one of the best prospects in the 2022 draft and fell to pick 14, where the Ravens gladly took him to be their guy for the next several years. Kyle Hamilton exploded onto the scene in 2023 as he was a first-team All-Pro and helped the Ravens get to the AFC Championship game. There were some questions about his usage throughout the 2024 season, but Hamilton still made the best out of the situation and added another Pro Bowl to his resume as well as a second-team All-Pro. This certainly applies to guys in the 2025 draft, and it applied to Hamilton back in 2022, but he was the definition of draft a good football player and think about the rest later. And the Ravens are one of the best teams year in and year out because of the way they run their franchise. They do exactly that, and this also applies to their other first-round pick from 2022, which was center Tyler Linderbaum. Hamilton was a 21-year-old rookie, and he's going to sign a very large contract extension soon, and I think the best way to describe this pick is pretty simple. Good franchise drafts good football player, and the results are what you'd expect, an A+ grade. Jordan Davis was the Eagles' first-round pick back in 2022, and there's a few things that need to be noted with this pick. Jordan Davis is never going to rack up the stat sheet and have a 65 pressure 10 sack season, and he's also not going to have a Derrick Brown 2023 type year and break the record for tackles in a single season for defensive tackles. But Davis's presence is felt in the run game, and he got better in 2024. Now, was that worth the 13th overall pick back in 2022? I would say probably not, and I do think the production for the 13th pick in the draft is underwhelming. I don't think he is a complete bust by any means, and I actually think he does his job pretty well for the Birds. He also had a sack in each of the NFC Championship game against Washington and even the Super Bowl against the Chiefs, but is a player that is essentially a rotational defensive tackle who is again good at what he does, certainly not elite by any means, worth that high of a pick? I don't think so, and I would be surprised if the Eagles sign him to a contract extension, and I like Jordan Davis the player, I just don't think Jordan Davis's production equates to the 13th overall pick a few years later. They could have done a lot worse with this pick, but I don't think this is a home run by any means, and this gets a C. Jameson Williams was the Lions' second first-round pick, and Jameson had his breakout year in 2024 as he had his first 1,000-yard receiving season of his career and had an additional 61 rushing yards for a near 1,100 total yard season. JMO is the Merriam-Webster textbook definition of a player who has to be accounted for every single play, because he can take the top off the defense on any given play, or like we saw multiple times in the 2024 season, and I think back specifically to the Seattle game, he can take a crosser to the house on any play too. His game speed is absolutely ridiculous, and I was really happy to see him break out in 2024, but this grade specifically is tough because he's only played in 33 of 51 possible career games. I know the ACL tear in the national championship obviously set him back for most of his rookie season, but even in the last 2 years, he's played in 27 of the last 34 regular season games, and 4 of those games were missed due to a gambling suspension. I like Jameson a lot as a player, and I think he is extremely talented, but I can't give him the same grade as a guy like Garrett Wilson, who has nearly 2,000 more receiving yards through 3 years. I do think the talent for Jameson is an A level, and the production will eventually get there, but for now, this pick is a B+. Chris Olave is up, and like his collegiate teammate Garrett Wilson, he started his NFL career off with back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. It was really impressive for Olave to go for over 1,000 yards back in his rookie year when he was being thrown passes from Jameis Winston and Andy Dalton, and while I'm not a Derek Carr fan, I thought Derek Carr was an upgrade from both of those guys entering 2023. Olave went for 1,100 yards, and given he was just 23 years old, looked like a budding star. I think a lot of what's said about Olave also applies to Garrett Wilson, but unfortunately Chris got hurt in 2024 on an absolute hospital ball of hospital balls thrown by Derek Carr, and we're not going to show the play, but unfortunately Olave's season was ended in week 9. Chris is a really good receiver, but he has a history of concussions and unfortunately has not played a full 17-game season since entering the league back in 2022. I think the talent here is an A-level grade, but I have a hard time giving the Olave selection an A grade when unfortunately he can't stay on the field, and I also acknowledge a lot of that is out of his hands. I wish the best for Chris Olave and hope he stays healthy, but 3 years later, this is an A-. Garrett Wilson was the second receiver taken in the 2022 draft and won the Offensive Rookie of the Year as he had 1,103 yards while being thrown passes from guys like Zach Wilson, Mike White, Joe Flacco, and Chris Streveler. He had another 1,000-yard season in 2023, and it was a year of what-ifs for the Jets as their season was over just 4 plays in, as Aaron Rodgers tore his Achilles, and that was that. Entering 2024, the expectations were high for Wilson and the Jets, and Wilson himself delivered as he had over 100 receptions for over 1,100 yards and also had 7 touchdowns. His quarterback play improved in 2024 despite how frustrating the Jets season was at times, and his numbers also improved. I honestly feel a little bad for Garrett Wilson because I think he is the textbook example of a player who is extremely talented, yet could put up even better numbers than he already is. I really struggle to grade the receivers in this class because context is key for all of the guys in this class, and I would like to see Garrett Wilson go somewhere where they can truly maximize the player he is, because it's certainly not happening right now in New York. He still has 3 1,000-yard seasons to his name and is a very good player, but I think there's some meat still left on the bone. Through 3 years, this is an A. Charles Cross was the third tackle taken in the top 10 of the 22 draft, and he was a really good pass-protecting prospect coming out of Mississippi State. Cross, like most young offensive linemen, had a transition period in his rookie year, but made nice strides in 2023. He continued his progression in 24, and at just 24 years old, looks like a really good offensive lineman for the Seahawks to extend and to be their left tackle for the next several years. Unfortunately, Cross gets beat more than you'd like despite the truly dominant tape he flashes at times, but given that he is still just 24 years old, I really think the best is yet to come for Charles. He had a Pro Bowl caliber season this past year, and what also should be noted for Cross is the interior offensive line, the guys that play directly next to him, certainly did not do him any favors this past year. He was a very bright spot on a pretty bad offensive line, and for him to still make strides, to me, is a great sign of things to come. I know statistically Charles gave up a lot of pressures in 2024, but the tape was overwhelmingly good, and I think it's only a matter of time until the Seahawks and Cross work out a second contract, an A- grade. Drake London is up, and Drake had the same issue for the first 2 years of his career that Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson have had really throughout their entire first 3 years, and that's not good quarterback play. London finally had better quarterback play in 2024 as the Falcons quarterbacks cumulatively threw for over 4,000 yards in 2024 relative to the 3,500 they threw for in 2023 and the 2,700 yards they threw for in 2022. Not surprisingly, Drake's numbers went up and he went for 1,000 yards for the first time in his career as he had a 100 catch, 1,200 yard year in 2024. He had 3 100 plus yard games this past year, including 2 150 plus yard games, and he is still a very young player as he will only turn 24 in July. The top 4 receivers in this class are all very good, and specifically with the top 3, mainly because Jameson Williams quarterback Jared Goff is a lot better than what the other guys have dealt with for most of their careers. Well, it was a matter of seeing them get to play with a good quarterback. I hope Michael Penix is the guy in Atlanta because I don't think it's unreasonable for Drake to be a 6 or 7 time 1,000 yard receiver if he stays healthy. He's a very talented player, and I think we're just scraping the surface of the player he can be, an A grade. Evan Neal was the Giants' second first-round pick of the night, and unfortunately for the Giants, Evan Neal didn't work out. He was a really solid prospect coming out of Alabama, and the hope was that him and Andrew Thomas would be a great tackle duo of the future, especially after Thomas himself struggled as a rookie back in 2020. Neal allowed 7 sacks as a rookie in 2022, and given he was 22 years old at the time, it was kind of dismissed after his rookie season that he had a bad year. Now, it was obviously something to note, but the general thought was, hey, we just went through this 2 years ago, let Andrew and everyone work with Evan in the building and it'll all work out. But it didn't. In 1,076 career pass blocking snaps, Neal was allowed 85 pressures, has committed 18 penalties, and has also allowed 11 sacks. The most notable point in his career was him responding to the critics saying, the person commenting on my performance, what does he do? Flip hot dogs and hamburgers? And unfortunately, that summarizes this draft pick 3 years later. Not surprisingly, this grade is an F. Ikem Ekwonu was the Panthers' first-round pick, and through 3 years, Ekwonu has been really up and down as the Panthers' left tackle. He is a really good run-blocking tackle, and I'll be honest, I really think a team should call Carolina and see what it would cost to bring him in, because he has good guard capabilities, and I think he would be maximized there. He struggles at times with speed rushers, and that's evident on tape, but there's also games where Ekwonu plays at a pretty high level, and I think he has improved year after year since being drafted back in 2022. But the problem, if you will, is I don't think he'll ever be a premier left tackle to the point where you're having top 4 or 5 left tackle discussions and automatically bring his name up. Ekwonu's not bad by any means, but he's committed 37 penalties since being drafted and has also allowed 24 sacks. For the good 4 or 5 game span Ekwonu has throughout each year, there's always a few games where he gets absolutely gashed in pass protection. I understand everyone has bad games, as not every quarterback is going to throw for 350 yards and 3 touchdowns, and likewise, not every tackle is going to pitch a shutout every week, but the lows are a lot lower than you'd like. Ikem had a C+ through 2 years, and it's the same C+ through 3 years. Kayvon Thibodeaux is up, and this is a tricky player to grade because I don't think it's as simple as looking at his numbers, and more specifically his sack numbers, given that he has 21 career sacks, and think he's even close to the player Trayvon Walker or Aiden Hutchinson are, despite Trayvon only having 3 more sacks in his career, and Hutch only having 7.5 more sacks in his career. Now, Hutch missed a lot of time in 2024, and we'll get to him in a minute, but I think it's fair to say Thibodeaux has been a disappointing player since being drafted number 5 overall 3 years ago. Thibodeaux fans will point to the 11.5 sack season he had in 2023, while not acknowledging he had just 43 pressures on 520 pass rushing snaps, which isn't good. Now, Thibodeaux did miss 5 games in 2024, but I don't think that factors in much to who he is as a player at this point in his career. 2.5 of Thibodeaux's 5.5 sacks in 2024 were in weeks 17 and 18 against the Colts, who are a non-playoff team, and the Eagles' backups in week 18. He isn't consistent, and I also think there's times where he doesn't look the part of being an NFL defensive end. He's not a complete bust, but to select him in the top 5 and question regularly what player you're going to get on Sunday isn't a good situation to have. And 3 years later, this is a C. Sauce Gardner is up, and despite everything the Jets have not done right over the last several years, the 2022 draft was not one of them, because they absolutely nailed the 2022 draft, and it started with their first 2 picks, as Sauce Gardner and Garrett Wilson were each named Rookie of the Year. Now, I know Sauce Gardner had a bit of a down year in 2024 relative to the seasons he had in each of his first 2 years, but he still had a pretty solid season, all things considered. He was credited with allowing a single touchdown, and through the first 3 years of his career, he has only allowed 1 touchdown in each season. Sauce having a quote-unquote down year in 2024 was notable because of each of the first 2 seasons he had, and more specifically his rookie year, in which he had 20 pass deflections, 2 interceptions, and was locking receivers up left and right. He had more penalties in 2024 than he did in each of his first 2 years, but I'm not going to bring this grade down when a team selects a 2-time first-team All-Pro with their first-round pick, because that's exactly what the goal is. And if you would ask anybody if they could draft a player who would go on to have 2 first-team All-Pros in 2 of their first 3 years, you know what the answer would be. And this grade does not change from where it was even back midway through his rookie year. This is an A+. Derek Stingley Jr. of the Texans is up, and he was their first of 2 first-round picks on the night, and believe it or not, there was a point in time where there were questions about the Stingley selection, and that kind of summarizes the pre-D'Amico Ryans era. 2022 was tough for the Texans, and they had their number 3 overall pick in a non-scheme fit, and Derek Stingley didn't play well in his rookie year due in large part to that. Not surprisingly, he stepped up his game in a big way in 2023, as he had 5 interceptions and even had 13 pass deflections, and looked like a much better player. He played the 2024 season at just 23 years old and took his game to another level this past year, and had another 5 interception season, and was named a first-team All-Pro. He also had 18 pass deflections, which is downright insane, and Stingley and Kamari Lassiter are really good corners for the Texans and look to be for some time. There was a low point where the Texans were legitimately questioned about not taking Sauce Gardner over Derek Stingley, but they trusted the process and things turned out good for them. This franchise trajectory is headed up, and the Derek Stingley pick gets an A+. Aiden Hutchinson, the Michigan man, is up, and through 3 years, Hutch has 28.5 sacks and has been a tremendous player for the Lions. Hutch had 53 pressures as a rookie back in 2022 and nearly doubled it in 2023 as he had 101 pressures and was named to the Pro Bowl. His 101 pressures were second in the NFL to Micah Parsons' 103, and he was off to a scorching hot start in 2024 as he had 45 pressures in just 4.5 games before fracturing both his tibia and fibula in a game against the Cowboys. I personally think Hutch was well on his way to winning Defensive Player of the Year in 2024, and at the time he was hurt, he was leading the NFL in pressures by a laughable amount, as in by double digits in just week 6. He still had 7.5 sacks this year and even had 17 quarterback hits before he got hurt, and he is a franchise cornerstone. He is a part of the legendary run of Lions first-round picks that helped them get back to where they are today, and that's a serious contender year in and year out. He is almost certainly going to get paid within the next year or so, and the only question GM Brad Holmes will ask when the time comes to Hutch's agent is how much. Hutch is a game changer, and 3 years later, this is an A+. Travon Walker was the number 1 pick in the 2022 draft, and there was a lot of controversy around this pick because Aiden Hutchinson was viewed as a better prospect. Now, while that is true, there can be some misconception around this pick at times, and especially because of the team success the Lions have had over the past few years. Travon Walker is a really good football player, and believe it or not, he is working on back-to-back 55-plus pressure, double-digit sack seasons, and will be 24 for most of the 2025 season. Sure, he's not the player Hutch has been since being drafted, but to be fair, Hutch took his game to a whole other level since being drafted number 2 overall. But Travon Walker is a player a lot of teams wish they had, and a guy who has gradually gotten better since entering the league. Admittedly, I had a lot of concerns about this pick when it was made, as everyone did, but the reality is, Travon Walker should be extended in Jacksonville and should play there for 7 or 8 years if he stays healthy, maybe even longer. Now, is this true number 1 overall pick franchise-changing production? No, but this is still a solid number 1 overall pick, and 3 years later, this is an A-. Felix Anudike-Uzomah was the final first-round pick of the night, and through 2 years, Felix has 3 career sacks and 3 career starts. There was a lot of upside with Anudike-Uzomah when he was selected, and the hope was the Chiefs could develop him over the course of his rookie contract. I'm not saying that's impossible and that still can't happen, but it's not looking good a couple of years in. Felix not getting on the field consistently is pretty telling, and if there is any positive spin to this pick a couple of years in, it's that he just turned 23 years old in January. He was a 21-year-old rookie, and whenever we discuss trench prospects that are young like Felix was in his rookie season, we always talk about the adjustment period for guys who are 21 years old going up against guys that are older and have that true grown man strength like a Penei Sewell or Lane Johnson, for example. But FAU not getting on the field consistently and only having 15 pressures in his entire second season after basically having a redshirt rookie year isn't good. Most of the time he is a non-factor, and that's unfortunate because he is in a good situation for himself to succeed by having guys like Chris Jones and George Karlaftis along the defensive line to be more of a focal point for the opposing offense to pay attention to. 2 years later, this is an F. Nolan Smith was the Eagles' second first-round pick of the night, with the other, of course, being Jalen Carter, and Nolan didn't play much as a rookie. He played really sparingly and only recorded 95 pass-rushing snaps in 2023. But like he always does, General Manager Howie Roseman had a plan with Nolan Smith, and we saw that plan in action in 2024. Nolan finished the 2024 season with 31 pressures, and believe it or not, actually had 19 pressures in the 4 postseason games during the Eagles' Super Bowl run. He had 4 sacks in 4 games during their postseason run, and I think that has to factor into the grade because if you look at Nolan's raw numbers through 2 years, you can say that he only has 7.5 career sacks and that he has not been much of a contributor, which would not be the case at all. The Eagles are one of the best teams year in and year out, and it's because they prioritize the trenches and they know how to draft and develop talent. Smith is just 24 years old, and I like where his game is headed due in large part to the progression we saw from him throughout the second half of his second season. With the Eagles developing trench talent the way they do, and with having Jalen Carter able to help everyone eat because of how much attention he commands, I really think the sky is the limit for Nolan. I expect this to go up, but for now, a B+ grade. Bryan Bresee was the Saints' first-round pick, and Bresee has been a solid pass-rushing defensive tackle through 2 years. He had a 7.5 sack second season and also had 14 quarterback hits. From a career projection standpoint, he reminds me a lot of the Bucs' Calijah Kancey, who we will discuss later in the video. The unfortunate part for Bresee is he doesn't have a Vita Vea next to him to help defend the run the way Calijah Kancey does, and because of this, there's times where Bresee gets washed out in the run game and it shows up on tape. The Saints finished 31st in yards per carry against in 2024 and 31st in rushing yards allowed, and it obviously would not be fair to attribute that solely to Bryan Bresee, but there's a reason the Saints couldn't stop the run in 2024. Unfortunately, Bryan played a part within that. He is really good in pass rushing situations, and for the sake of his career, I really hope they get a good run-stopping defensive tackle so Bresee can maximize his talents and the Saints can be an overall better football team. That would be extremely beneficial for both Bryan and the Saints at this point, but the Saints have a very interesting way of going about how they build their team each and every offseason. Bresee is a really solid player, and 2 years in, this is a B+. Myles Murphy was the Bengals' first-round pick, and 2 years in his career, he has a grand total of 3 sacks in 30 games with 0 career starts. I know the immediate reaction is to automatically think this is an F grade and to move on and discuss the next player. And while I don't entirely disagree, I think there needs to be some context around this pick, or more specifically, how this franchise has used Murphy since he was drafted. Murphy had 20 pressures on 215 pass rushing snaps in 2024, and actually had the second highest pass rush win rate on the team, only behind Trey Hendrickson, of course. Sam Hubbard, for reference, had 18 pressures on 253 pass rushing snaps and was a pretty disappointing player, especially given he signed a $40 million contract a couple of off seasons ago. Bengals fans are frustrated with owner Mike Brown and believe Hubbard is playing over Murphy because of money, and they have a rightful reason to feel that way. I don't think Murphy is a hit by any definition, but I don't think the organization has done a good job of using him either, much less getting him close to maximizing what he can do. He will be just 23 years old in week 1 of the 2025 season, so there is still hope he gets opportunities and can turn it around. He hasn't been great, and I do want that to be clear, and I think this is a combination of failure on the organization side and the player also not performing at a high level either, an F grade. Anton Harrison is up, and I'll be honest, I was very critical of Anton early in the 2024 season. The Jags did not have a good 2024 season as they started out 0-4, and Harrison was a part of the problem. He allowed 2 sacks in week 1 against the Dolphins and allowed another 3 pressures against the Browns in week 2, including a quarterback hit, and I was worried about where his career was headed as an NFL player. But I want to credit Anton for finishing the year the way he did, as he had a really good end to his second season. He allowed 15 pressures in the first 6 games of the year, including 2 games with 4 pressures, but allowed just 16 pressures in the final 10 games. And if you're wondering why that's 16 games and not 17, it's because he missed a game down the stretch. I was really worried the Jags drafted a bust at right tackle and that former GM Trent Baalke missed on another draft pick, but I think there was a lot of positives from Harrison as the 2024 season ended, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the Jags offense in 2025. Obviously, with Trevor Lawrence and Brian Thomas Jr., Harrison will never receive national love or recognition unless he has a truly dominant all-pro caliber season, but he gives Will Anderson fits regularly, and he is just 23 years old. I think they have a good right tackle, and this is an A-. Mazi Smith is up, and there needs to be a lot of context around this pick. Mazi has not performed well through the first few years of his career, and in fact was in a video we released late in the 2024 season about players who have disappointed from the 2023 draft. But one of my biggest problems with this pick wasn't even Mazi himself, it was how the Cowboys handled him once he was drafted. There was an article that had quotes from former Cowboys head coach Mike McCarthy that said something along the lines of, "We wanted to get him to a comfortable weight, and that's a part of the transition period," and that always rubbed me the wrong way, because a 335-pound defensive tackle is substantially different from a 310-pound defensive tackle, and I hated the plan the organization had for Mazi to begin with. There's always a lot of discussions about teams setting quarterbacks up to fail, and I think the Cowboys set Mazi Smith up to fail. He improved a bit in his second season compared to his first, but 2 years later, I would give the organization a complete F for how they handled this, and for Mazi's production, this gets a D grade. Dalton Kincaid is up, and this is a very tough pick to grade for a few reasons. He had a promising rookie season in which he had over 70 receptions and over 670 yards. He also caught 80% of the passes thrown his way, which is insane for any player, let alone a rookie tight end. But 2024 was pretty frustrating for Kincaid because he missed some time and was not the same player in his second season as he was in his rookie season. And fair or not, anytime a tight end is drafted in the first round, they are held to a higher standard because they are a pass catcher and they need to produce. But Kincaid never really produced in year 2, and the most amount of yards he had in a single game was just 53 yards. If this was a receiver, the grade would be very low because he hasn't produced close to the level you'd hope for from a first-round tight end. He also has just 4 career touchdowns, and yes, you can obviously attribute Josh Allen's legs to some of the reason as to why Kincaid does not have as many receiving touchdowns as other players, but I think he was pretty disappointing in 2024, all things considered. He had 4 receptions or less in 11 of the 13 games he played, and averaged just 34.5 receiving yards per game, which was a decline from his rookie season. I think he can get back to the player he was as a rookie in 2025, but after a B+ grade last year, this is a C+. Deonte Banks was the Giants' first-round pick, and this was a tough pick for the Giants to make because they were the last team standing in a game of musical chairs. The receiving room heading into the 2023 season for the Giants wasn't good, and the run for the receivers in this draft ended directly in front of them. Getting Daniel Jones, a good receiver, was the plan at the time, as Daniel was coming off of a solid season in which the Giants won a playoff game, and Daniel looked good in the process. Unfortunately, Deonte Banks hasn't worked out for the Giants, and when he was targeted in 2024, he allowed 6 touchdowns to 0 interceptions and had 6 penalties called on him. There's also been a lack of effort at times from Deonte, and it's been a very frustrating pick for the Giants and their fan base just 2 years in. There were flashes from Deonte in his rookie year, but the lack of effort and eventually getting benched in his second season is a good summarization of this pick. And the Giants missing out on the receiver run and drafting a player they had to bench, and a player who was openly showing a lack of effort, describes their last couple of seasons, an F grade. Jordan Addison was the Vikings' first-round pick and the fourth consecutive receiver taken. He had a really productive rookie year as he had over 900 yards and 10 touchdowns, and he followed it up with an 875-yard, 10 total touchdown season in year 2. And with guys like himself, Zay Flowers, Jackson Smith-Njigba, and even Puka Nacua in this class, you may be surprised to know that Jordan Addison actually leads this class in receiving touchdowns through 2 years. I am a firm believer that Addison, like another player we will discuss very shortly, is a good player that is not being maximized statistically speaking, and having Justin Jefferson as a teammate is naturally going to do that for not just Jordan Addison, but for anybody. He is only 23 years old, and with the potential we've seen from him in the first 2 years, he should be a very good player in this league for a long time. I really think it's a matter of time until he has a 1,000-yard season, and unfortunately he missed a few games in 2024, so if he played all 17 games, maybe he would have gotten it this past year. Unfortunately, he didn't, but still had a pretty good season. Minnesota wanted a complimentary receiver to Justin Jefferson, and that's exactly what they got. Addison is a very good player, and this is an A. Zay Flowers was the Ravens' first-round pick, and 2 years in, Zay Flowers is second in the 2023 class in receiving yards, only behind Puka Nacua. Flowers had the first 1,000-yard season of his career in 2024 and also made the Pro Bowl. He is a very good player for the Ravens, and for a franchise that has done so many things right over the course of their franchise history, drafting and developing receivers surprisingly is not one of them, at least not as much as you'd think. But Zay Flowers looks like he is going to be the guy to change that for the Ravens. He is currently 17th in team history in receiving yards, and if he has 1,000 yards in 2025, which is very possible, and to be completely honest, I'd be surprised if he didn't have 1,000 yards, then he would move into the top 7 in receiving yards already. I like Zay a lot, and I think he is a player who will be a perennial 1,000-yard guy if he stays healthy. I really do think we are just scraping the surface of what Flowers is capable of. There was a point in 2024 where he had 4 games out of 5 with 110 or more yards, and I think he is a very, very good player. I also think it's fair to say he's not on a team that will maximize what he can do from a number standpoint, but the Ravens drafted a really good player in Flowers. 2 years in, this is an A. Quentin Johnston was the second of 4 consecutive receivers taken, and unfortunately for the Chargers, he's been the least productive of the 4. Johnston had a brutal rookie season as he averaged just 25 yards per game and was known for a big drop against the Packers. I don't think Johnston is a player that's doomed by any means, as he had a much better second season than he did rookie year, and believe it or not, had over 700 yards and 8 touchdowns in 2024. I think it is absolutely worth noting he had 186 of his 1,142 career yards in a Week 18 game against the Raiders, and that was in a game against a very bad secondary, but I don't think Johnston is this all-time draft bust the way at times he's made out to be. Yes, he has been disappointing as a first-round receiver, and I wouldn't argue that, but I think there is a slight difference between how people view him versus the player he actually is, meaning I don't think he is an all-time draft bust the way social media makes him out to be at times. It also doesn't help QJ that some of his drops came at the worst time and in front of everyone to see. He improved in 2024, and that is a positive, but for now, this is a D+. Jackson Smith-Njigba was the first receiver taken in the 2023 draft, and after being the third option in the Seahawks offense as a rookie in 2023 behind Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, Smith-Njigba became the go-to guy in 2024. He had his first both 100 reception season and 1,000-yard season this past year, and I think he is a very talented receiver, and the sky is the limit for him. COVID obviously impacted the draft in a big way, and the age of prospects rose between 2020 and 2023, and it wasn't uncommon to have a lot of 23 or 24-year-old rookies, and even in some cases 25, but this class had a lot of 21-year-old rookies and guys like JSN, Jordan Addison, and Christian Gonzalez to name a few. And Smith-Njigba had a 7-game stretch in the 2024 season where he had 50 receptions for 701 yards and 5 touchdowns, and I really love the duo of him and DK Metcalf. We talk about having a plan for players when you draft them, and the Seahawks absolutely had a plan with JSN, which was to eventually replace Tyler Lockett, and we saw that happen this year. We really try to reserve the A+ grades for the special players, but I think JSN is on the rise and could eventually get there. After a C+ grade last year, it rises all the way to an A this year. Calijah Kancey is up, and I think Kancey is a very solid defensive tackle for the Bucs, and Bucs fans stop me if you've heard this before, but a Tampa Bay Buccaneers player is underrated and underappreciated by the national media. Kancey missed some time in 2024 as he only played in 12 games, but he finished the year with 17 quarterback hits and 7.5 sacks, both of which were improvements from his rookie year despite playing 2 more games in 2023 than he did in 2024. Kancey can get washed out in the run game at times, but he makes up for it with his ability to push the pocket and to be able to get after the quarterback. And to be completely honest, it's fine if Kancey gets pushed around a little bit in the run game because Vita Vea is there along the defensive line and they perfectly complement one another. Kancey has violent hands, and if he plays all 17 games in 2025, I wouldn't be surprised at all if he makes a Pro Bowl. He misses tackles at times, but I think he is a really good player, and he will be just 24 years old at the start of the 25 season. He's missed 8 career games, so I hope he can get that straightened out, but he has been a very solid player for Tampa, a B+. Jack Campbell had a solid rookie season as he had 95 total tackles along with 5 TFLs and 2 sacks. He finished his second season with over 130 tackles, 5 TFLs, 5 pass deflection, and 5 quarterback hits. He improved significantly from year 1 to year 2 and only played 59% of the Lions' defensive snaps in 23, yet looked like a really good player during his rookie year. That number jumped all the way up to 89% in year 2, and he is a very good player that should play for the Lions for the next several years. Campbell is part of an insane draft class that included Jahmyr Gibbs, himself of course, Sam Laporta, and Brian Branch, and Campbell is definitely the least discussed of the big 4 from the Lions 2023 class, but he is a rock-solid linebacker and a guy that a lot of teams wish they had. Jack Campbell to me was the definition of a safe prospect that will play at a high floor, and I think when people hear that about a prospect, they think the player is boring with a relatively low ceiling, but that is not the case with Jack Campbell. He reads his keys in the run game right, he doesn't miss a lot of tackles, and he's in the right place more often than not. I thought his rookie year was a stepping stone for him, and 2024 was going to be a big year for him, and it was. Campbell is a really good player, and Brad Holmes is a really good GM, and sometimes it's as simple as taking the best player available and not overthinking it. This is an A. I know the Patriots have not had a lot of team success over the past few years, but I really like the selection of Christian Gonzalez at pick 17 when it was made. This was due in large part to Washington selecting Emmanuel Forbes at pick 16, of course, and Gonzalez had a pretty solid rookie season when he was on the field. Unfortunately, he tore his labrum and dislocated his shoulder, which prematurely ended his rookie year. He looked good as a 21-year-old corner, but only played 4 games, so the grade last year was obviously incomplete. With all of the time off, I was admittedly a little worried that Christian would get picked on early in the 24 season, as he was getting back from injury and back to live football, but he more than held his own. He was a second-team All-Pro, had 2 interceptions, and even had a fumble return for a touchdown. I couldn't believe he was available for New England at pick 17, and they didn't make the mistake of passing on him. He is a really good player and is at this point in his career a legitimate player to build around and a borderline franchise cornerstone. 2 years later, this is an A+. Emmanuel Forbes was the second corner selected in the 2023 draft after Seattle selected Devin Witherspoon at number 5 overall. I didn't like this pick from the beginning as I thought now Patriots corner Christian Gonzalez was a better player in pretty much every way, and I also hated the fact that Washington was selecting an extremely light corner in a division where you're going to have to go up against a guy like AJ Brown twice a year who outweighs Forbes by a good 40 pounds. And in week 4 of Forbes' rookie season, which was his first game against Philly, Forbes was targeted 13 times and allowed 9 receptions for 197 yards and 2 touchdowns, and allowed an opposing passer rating of 151.4 when targeted. He got burnt in coverage quite a bit during his time in Washington, and was flat out released before his second season ended. Not traded for a future draft pick, but flat out released. I was hoping Forbes would prove everyone wrong and become a great corner for Washington, but unfortunately it didn't work out. He is now a member of the Los Angeles Rams, and not surprisingly, this grade is an F. Will McDonald burst onto the scene in his second season in a big way after not playing much as a rookie. I know the Jets are a very dysfunctional team at times, but they had a clear plan with McDonald and it showed in 2024. He finished the year with over 60 pressures, 24 quarterback hits, and had 10.5 sacks in what was a very good year for him personally. Unfortunately, McDonald missed his fair share of tackles in 2024, as he was credited with 11 missed tackles this year, but when you are able to flash as a pass rusher the way McDonald did, you you are okay with the occasional bad plays that come with as many big plays as he makes. It is also worth noting McDonald is a liability at times in the run game, which certainly factors into his grade, but I think 2024 was the start of the type of player that McDonald will be over the next few years, barring health of course. I am genuinely excited for a healthy Jermaine Johnson and Will McDonald, and even Big Q as well, to get after the quarterback in the future. McDonald had a tremendous second season after a rocky first year, and 2 years in, this is an A. Broderick Jones is up, and through 2 years, this pick has largely been disappointing. There are several reasons for this, and I know a lot of the time people want to blame one specific thing or person, and in this case, a lot of the time, Steelers fans want to blame offensive line coach Pat Meyer. And while I'm not saying he is blameless, because he certainly has a part in this, Broderick has allowed 79 pressures on 1,080 career pass blocking snaps, and is coming off a season in 2024 in which he allowed 11 sacks, which was tied for second most in the NFL behind his teammate Dan Moore, and is coming off of a year in which he also was credited with 10 penalties. Jones has been a disappointing player, and I know there's a belief that if he can play left tackle, which is where he played in college for Georgia, that everything will magically work out and he'll be fine. But there's a lot of technical problems with Broderick, like getting out of his stance and having his hands way too wide at times, and I hope he turns it around next year. He will be just 24 years old at the start of the 2025 season, so there is some hope for him to turn it around, but for now, this is an F. Lucas Van Ness was the Packers' first-round selection, and through 2 years, Van Ness has seasons with 22 pressures and 20 pressures, and has 7 career sacks. Van Ness has been an incredibly frustrating player for Packers fans to watch over the first 2 years because, simply put, there's not a lot of NFL players built the way Van Ness is, both physically and especially athletically. His arm length, hand size, 40-yard dash, 3-cone, and 20-yard shuttle were all in the 69th percentile or better when he was as a prospect. His broad jump was also in the 61st percentile, and when Van Ness gets loose at times, you can see how freakish of an athlete he is. But more often than not with Van Ness, there's simply no plan, and because of how athletic he is, there's naturally going to be some production, and also just due to him being on the field, but there's no denying how disappointing of a pick this has been through the first few years. He will be just 24 at the start of the 25 season, so he can still get his career turned around, but for how athletically gifted he is, there's not a lot else going his way, and it's frustrating to watch for a team who needs help at the edge position. 2 years in, this is a C-. Jahmyr Gibbs was the first of 2 Lions first-round picks, and some people may not remember, though I know Lions fans definitely remember, but the Lions faced a lot of criticism when this pick was made. How could they possibly trade back for a running back when Bijan Robinson, the best running back prospect since Saquon Barkley, was available when they were initially on the clock at pick 6? Well, in the first 2 years of his career, Jahmyr Gibbs is a 2-time Pro Bowler, and in his second season, had over 1,900 total yards and 20 total touchdowns. I honestly think due in some part to the year Saquon Barkley had, and even due to the year Derrick Henry had, that Gibbs' season was a little under-discussed nationally at times, but I know this word gets tossed around far too often in the draft process, but I'll say it, Jahmyr Gibbs had a generational second season. 1,900 total yards and 20 total touchdowns is downright insane. The Lions had the infrastructure to support a top 12 pick on a running back, and Gibbs is a legitimate home run threat every time he touches the football. He is undoubtedly one of the best backs in the league, and this is an easy A+. Peter Skoronski was the Titans' first-round pick, and like a lot of young offensive linemen going from playing 20 or 21-year-old collegiate players every week to wrestling guys in the trenches like DeForest Buckner twice a season, Peter Skoronski had a bit of a transition period once he got to the NFL, and you could even say the transition period lasted into his second season a bit, at least early in 2024. I was really excited for his and J.C. Latham's future with the idea of them being coached by Bill Callahan, the Titans' offensive line coach, who is, of course, Titans head coach Brian Callahan's father. And Skoronski had a tremendous end to his second season, as in the final 7 games of the year, he allowed just 5 pressures on 273 pass blocking snaps and looked like the player he was at Northwestern. That is a pretty big difference for Peter Skoronski, considering he allowed 23 pressures on 388 pass blocking snaps in weeks 1 through 11 of 2024. And anytime a player makes significant strides like this down the stretch of their second season, especially at just 23 years old, I am going to be optimistic about this player's future every single time. And I'm really optimistic about J.C. Latham, Peter Skoronski, and Lloyd Cushenberry entering 2025. 2 years later, this is an A-. Darnell Wright is up, and I know the Bears had a rough 2024 season, but Darnell Wright had a really good year, all things considered. Unfortunately, if you are aware of any play Darnell Wright has been a part of, it's probably from the Week 2 Sunday night game in Houston, in which Danielle Hunter got the best of Darnell, multiple times. But Danielle Hunter is a 5-time Pro Bowler and a guy who has 99.5 career sacks, and he's really good at what he does. And Darnell Wright, like Peter Skoronski, had a tremendous end to his second season. Obviously, when you think of the 2024 Bears, you probably think of Caleb Williams getting sacked or not living up to unrealistic expectations, but Darnell himself was a really good player. He allowed a single sack from Week 11 on after being credited with allowing 5 sacks in the first 8 games of the year. He will be just 24 at the start of the 2025 season, and I think next year will be the year where Darnell Wright really starts to get recognized nationally. He improved across the board from 23 to 24, and the one thing I'd like to see from him cut down next year is penalties. He is, by every definition, trending upwards, and through 2 years, this is an A-. Jalen Carter was one of the best defensive tackle prospects in the past 10 years, and he only fell to pick 9 because of an off-the-field situation. He was arguably the best prospect in this class, and he's lived up to the hype in the first 2 years of his career. He finished second in Defensive Rookie of the Year voting to only Will Anderson in 2023, and in 2024, took his game to another level as he had 16 quarterback hits, was a second-team All-Pro, finished top 12 in Defensive Player of the Year voting, and the accolade I'm sure everyone cares about most, he was also named a Pro Bowler. His sack numbers technically went down from his rookie year to his second year, but the attention he commands in every single play is noticeable, and Birds fans especially know this. He is a large reason, no pun intended, they won the Super Bowl. Carter is also a big reason Vic Fangio was able to consistently get home with just 4 rushers in the Super Bowl, and Jalen had 53 pressures in the regular season in 2024 and had an additional 22 pressures in the 4 postseason games. Jalen is only 23 years old, and the only question that's going to be asked when it's time for him to get a new contract is how much. He's an elite player, and Howie Roseman did it again, an easy A+. Bijan Robinson was one of the easier evaluations as a prospect over the past couple of years, and through 2 years, he has lived up to the lofty expectations and more. The only unfortunate part for Bijan in 2024 was he didn't play on a good team, and it was an insane year across the board for running backs, as guys like Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, and Jahmyr Gibbs all had phenomenal years. But you may be surprised to know in 2024 that Bijan had 1,887 total yards and 15 total touchdowns and was named to his first career Pro Bowl. He will be just 23 years old during the 2025 season, and with the way Michael Penix played towards the end of the year, I love the offensive future in the Big A. In 2 years, Bijan has over 3,300 total career yards and 23 total touchdowns, and I think he's been everything the Falcons could have asked for and more when they were on the clock a few years ago. I'm sure there's some Falcons fans that wish they drafted Jalen Carter instead of Bijan because of how bad their pass rush routinely is, but Bijan was a tremendous prospect and has played like it through the first 2 years, and I'd be surprised if he doesn't have another 11 or 1,200 yard year in 2025, an A+ grade. Tyree Wilson of the Raiders was the 7th overall pick, and Tyree admittedly struggled during his rookie year. There were certainly times he flashed during the 2023 season, but there was a point during his rookie year where I had concerns that this was going to be an all-time bad pick. He picked it up a little bit towards the end of his rookie year and flashed at times during his second year too. He will be 25 during the 2025 season and actually had 37 pressures in his second year, including an 8 pressure game against New Orleans in what was the best game of his career so far. Tyree's big problem is he doesn't have a counter off the bull rush, and there's times, and a lot more times than Raiders fans would like, where opposing offensive linemen swipe his hands away, or because they too are NFL players and are paid to be good at their job, know how to neutralize the bull rush and stop Tyree before he can get going. The tools are there for him and the flashes are too, it's just a matter of being able to put it all together. And 2025 will be a make or break year for him, but for now, this is a C-. Paris Johnson Jr. of the Cardinals is up, and in order to get Paris, the Cardinals traded back from pick 3 to pick 12, then went back up to pick 6 to get their tackle of the future. Paris definitely had an adjustment period in his rookie season at right tackle, but got better as the season went on. He also went back to his collegiate position of left tackle in 2024, and I thought the transition for Paris was a lot more natural. He played in 14 of the 17 possible games in 2024 before suffering a left knee injury, which prematurely ended his sophomore season, but he was still a very good player when he played. He was credited with 515 pass blocking snaps in 2024 and allowed 4 sacks, only one of which came after week 5. He was more efficient as he transitioned back to left tackle, he improved in the run game, and he did a great job of protecting Kyler Murray's blindside. I think people get caught up in tackles like Penei Sewell or Joe Alt, who are each very good players, and act like if tackles are not on either of their levels, then they're a disappointing first-round pick or not going to be able to live up to the hype. But that is not the case. Paris Johnson is one of the most underappreciated players in the NFL. He is a franchise tackle, and he should be in the desert for a long, long time. An A+ grade. Devin Witherspoon of the Seahawks is up, and Witherspoon has started his career off with back-to-back Pro Bowls and has been a tremendous player for Seattle. Not only has he been a tremendous player for Seattle, but he has really changed the culture of the team and plays with a toughness and an edge that you have to see to really understand how impactful he is. He's tough, he's competitive, and he's fiery as hell, and has 14 tackles for a loss in the first 2 years of his career alone as a corner. During Super Bowl Media Week, he gave a receiver in the division bulletin board material, as he said Marvin Harrison Jr. is not hard to guard, and there's certainly times where corners yap, and if you will, just yap, but Witherspoon backs it up. He's one of my favorite corners in the entire league, and I loved him as a prospect coming out of Illinois. He's everything you'd want in a corner. Tough, really good at recognizing plays before they happen, and Seattle fans know how lucky they are to have him. And Witherspoon gets the same grade as he did last year, an easy A+. Anthony Richardson was the third quarterback taken in the first 4 picks, and through 2 years, AR has more interceptions than he has touchdown passes, as he has 11 passing touchdowns to 13 interceptions. Drafting Anthony Richardson in the top 5 was always going to be a risk because of how raw he was as a prospect coming out of Florida, and it's shown through the first few years of his career. He only played 4 games during his rookie year and didn't look as bad as people make him out to be now, and the hope was he could put it together in 2024. Unfortunately, he completed less than 48% of his passes in 2024, and he threw just 8 touchdowns to 12 interceptions in his second season, and pretty much anything that could have went wrong for AR last year did. Whether it was his own play, or even what he is probably most known for at this point, checking out of a game midway through the season and then proceeding to get benched for a 39-year-old Joe Flacco, it was a tough year for Anthony and the Colts. It seemed for every home run grand slam play he made, there were several instances where he'd strike out with the bases loaded. He is actually younger than both Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders, so there is hope that he can pan out at just 23 years old, but 2 years in, this is an F. The Texans surprised everyone when they traded all the way up from pick 12 to pick 3 to go get pass rusher Will Anderson, and 2 years later they look like geniuses. Anderson had a tremendous rookie season as he had over 55 pressures, had 22 quarterback hits, had 7 sacks, and won the Defensive Rookie of the Year award. He also made the Pro Bowl at just 22 years old, and the future was very bright for Anderson and the Texans. In 2024, he would go on to have his first double-digit sack season of his career at just 23 years old, and I really think the sky is the limit for him. He is in a good situation at the moment as he gets to play opposite of Danielle Hunter, and each player had 10+ sacks in their first season as teammates in 2024. Will Anderson was a very hyped-up prospect from the middle of his sophomore season at Alabama, and he had really high expectations entering his rookie season a couple of years ago. And for as tough as it can be to adjust to the trenches at the NFL level, Will Anderson didn't seem to struggle really at all. He is everything the Texans hoped for when they traded all the way up to pick 3, and this is an A+. CJ Stroud is up, and entering 2024, it was always going to be difficult for him to replicate the year he had in 2023 and to be the player the media expected him to be. I always thought the expectations for the Texans entering last year were enormously high, and for Stroud personally as well. His numbers declined from 23 to 24 across the board, but I didn't think Stroud played bad in his second season compared to his first. We often talk about players dealing with adversity, and CJ Stroud dealt with an enormous amount of adversity in year 2, as he had his top 3 receivers all go down at one point and for extended time periods at that. Him throwing 5 interceptions on 499 passes in his rookie season was never going to be sustainable, and we saw that in 2024. The interior offensive line was also really bad for the Texans, and the positive thing to take away from the 2024 Texans season is they still won a playoff game, and CJ still looked pretty solid in the process. He looked like a different player against the Chargers in the wildcard playoff game than he did for most of the regular season, and I am eager to see what Houston does this offseason. The grade from last year doesn't change for Stroud, and through 2 years, this is an A+. Bryce Young was the #1 pick in the 2023 draft, and I'll be honest, this was a pick I struggled with to grade for a few reasons. I've said before I'm willing to dismiss a lot of his rookie year because he was set up to fail, big time. His offensive line was horrible, his receivers outside of an even then 33-year-old Adam Thielen were terrible, and his head coach was fired midway through his rookie year. 2024 was supposed to be different, but it didn't start out that way, as the Panthers were outscored 73-13 in the first 2 games of the season, and Bryce looked about as bad as it could get, and he was starting to look like an all-time draft bust. But over the final 10 games of his second season, he had 20 total touchdowns to 6 interceptions and looked like a completely different player. He looked like the Alabama Bryce Young. And in the final 3 games of 2024, he had 10 total touchdowns to 0 turnovers, and the Panthers put up 35 or more points twice. But how much do you factor that into a guy's career who lifetime has a 6-22 record as a starter and has just 26 touchdowns to 19 interceptions and has an additional 8 lost fumbles? And that's the part I struggle with. I love Bryce Young, and I think his future is very bright, and I couldn't have been happier for him and the Panthers fan base to end the 2024 season the way they did. But this is a #1 overall pick we're talking about here. I really think the grade will be higher next year, but after a D+ last year, it jumps to a B- this year. The Carolina Panthers traded up 1 spot from pick 33 with the Buffalo Bills to draft South Carolina's Xavier Legette. Legette was the 7th wide receiver drafted in the first round and finished his rookie season with 49 receptions for 497 receiving yards and 4 touchdowns. It was a very up and down year for Legette and the Panthers, and especially Xavier, as he was credited with 8 drops alone in 2024. He, of course, had the big drop against the Eagles in week 14, but I thought the flashes with Xavier were there. Because the first half of the Panthers season was so hectic, I wouldn't have expected all that much from Legette when you factor everything in. I mean, he had 18 receptions in his first 7 games, and 6 came in 1 game alone. He started to pick it up a bit down the stretch as he had at least 3 receptions in 7 of his final 9 games in his rookie year, and I do think he is a breakout candidate entering 2025. He has an electric personality, his work ethic has been noted countless times, and he had surgery on his wrist for an injury that dated back to 2021, and obviously that plays a big part in his job, which of course is catching the football. Right now I would give this a C+, with the grade expected to rise pretty significantly in 2025. Ricky Pearsall was the 49ers' first-round pick, and this is not a normal pick to grade by any means. Ricky was shot right before the season started, and we are all obviously glad he is okay and that he is still with us first and foremost, but because of this event and this life-changing moment, Ricky understandably didn't play for the first several weeks of the season. He was shot on August 31st and made his debut less than 2 months later on October 20th against the Chiefs. Pearsall had 132 yards in his first 3 games, then only recorded 2 receptions over his next 5 games, despite playing 165 snaps during this span. I don't think it was a matter of Ricky not being good enough or a potential first-round disappointment by any means, because he finished his rookie year by having 247 yards and 2 touchdowns during the final 3 games, including a 141-yard game against the Lions on Monday night. Overall, he finished his rookie year with 400 receiving yards on the dot, and I have to be honest, this is one of the most difficult picks to grade because there's a lot to factor in. I think he has the talent to be a really good player, and if you wanted to go with incomplete, I would be fine with that, but for the sake of this video, Ricky Pearsall gets a B-. Nate Wiggins, the talented corner from Clemson, is up, and we'll say this about another franchise shortly, but I thought this was a very Baltimore Ravens pick, and I mean that in the best way. There was a lot of conversation about Wiggins heading into the draft about him not being heavy enough as a player, and that there were injury concerns. But in typical Ravens fashion, they drafted a good player, and he's already proving them right. I honestly think Nate had a pretty underrated year and is not being talked about probably the way that he should be. And it makes sense with some of the other defensive players in this class, but outside of a few penalties here and there, which is going to happen for every corner at times, let alone a rookie 21-year-old corner in the first few games of his career, the year he had was pretty positive all things considered. He didn't miss as many tackles as I thought he would with the size concerns, at least it wasn't noticeably high compared to other players, and I think the Ravens have a starting corner for the next couple of seasons. Not an elite rookie season, but a very good one, and we give this an A-. Tyler Guyton was the 8th tackle selected in the 2024 draft and was also making the transition from right tackle, which he played at Oklahoma, to left tackle, and at times he played like it. He was welcomed into the NFL by the one and only Myles Garrett and was attributed with allowing a sack in each of his first 4 games. However, after getting through the first 4 games, he only allowed 2 sacks for the remainder of the year, and I do think he got better as the season went on. He was only 22 years old during his rookie season and also battled injury, and like you would expect from the 8th tackle selected in a draft class, there was a lot of growing pains. He had 8 penalties as a rookie, which is obviously not good, but I would also argue he was set up to fail in some ways, as he was a right tackle in college, then switched to an incredibly difficult position to play, and was basically told to go make it happen. I think that needs to be noted because there were flashes from Guyton, but I don't like the way the front office handled this in a myriad of ways. 1 year later, this is a C+. The Kansas City Chiefs traded up in the draft to go get the speedster Xavier Worthy, and in his rookie year, Worthy would go on to have 742 total yards and 9 total touchdowns. His usage was always going to be interesting to me because I didn't know how Kansas City would get the ball in his hands. He opened the year against Baltimore with a 2-touchdown game, then was quiet for a few weeks before having a 73-yard game against the Chargers. KC really started using him around week 10, and he became a more prominent player in the offense down the stretch of the season. If you took the final 7 games he played in 2024 and translated to a full 17-game season, he would have been on pace for 95 receptions, 952 yards, and 7 receiving touchdowns, along with an additional 163 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. Obviously, with who his quarterback is, the sky is the limit for Xavier, especially in this offense. He is only 21 years old, and I can't wait to see what he does in 2025 because I think he will progressively get better. This was an all-time receiving class, and 1 year later, this is a B+. Darius Robinson was the Cardinals' second first-round selection of the night, as their first was of course used on wide receiver Marvin Harrison Jr., and unfortunately Darius didn't make his debut until week 13 against the Vikings. In those 6 games he had 10 total tackles and a sack. He missed most of the year due to a calf injury, and a lot of the time you see rookie defensive linemen gradually get better as the season goes on because they get more and more accustomed to the NFL and what it requires each and every week, especially in the trenches. But because Darius missed most of the year, this was effectively a redshirt year for him, and he only played 184 total snaps. He was adjusting to the physicality of the NFL and also had a personal tragedy mixed in with this. I bring this up because there was a lot going on here with Darius Robinson in his rookie season, and he didn't start a game during his rookie season while recovering from injury. It was good to see him get his feet wet in 2024, but 1 year later, this is incomplete. Graham Barton was a prospect I liked a lot coming out of Duke, and I thought for sure that Green Bay was going to snatch him up 1 pick earlier than Tampa Bay did. Obviously, Baker Mayfield had a tremendous season as he threw for over 40 touchdowns. Tampa fans know this, and this is a common theme with the Bucs, but I don't think that was discussed enough. Some of Baker's success can absolutely be attributed to the center of the pocket consistently being clean, and Graham Barton played a big part within that. I am a firm believer that if an offensive lineman is having success, and consistent success at 21 or 22 years old, then I think they will continue to be a good player because of how difficult it is to play offensive line in the NFL, let alone at such a young age. I think he'll rebound from an early snap against the Commanders in the playoffs, and I also don't think that should impact his grade at all. I like Graham Barton a lot. He had a good rookie season, and this is an A-. Jordan Morgan, the versatile offensive lineman from Arizona, was the Packers' first-round pick, and he played sparingly at right guard during his rookie season. He only started 1 game, which was against the Lions in Week 9, and actually started at left guard before being placed on injured reserve with a shoulder injury. He was fine when he played, but only logged 186 snaps during his rookie season and only recorded 1 start. He only played 30 snaps or more in a game twice, and if I had to give a grade here, it would probably be a B+, but I'm not going to force a grade on a player with a pretty limited sample size. I liked Morgan a lot as a prospect, and I think he will be fine in 2025 and beyond, assuming he stays healthy, of course. For now, an incomplete grade. Terrion Arnold was the Lions' first-round pick, and I liked this pick a lot when it was made because I thought corner was one of the Lions' biggest needs entering the 2024 draft, and I also liked that they traded directly in front of the division rival Packers to go get who they thought was their guy. Terrion played most of his rookie season, and like you would expect from a 21-year-old rookie corner, there were a lot of ups and downs. He had several penalties early on, and there were some people that saw those penalties early on and assumed that's how the rest of his rookie season went, but that wasn't the case. He had 8 penalties called on him in the first 4 games of the year, but only had 2 the rest of the season. It was not all sunshine and rainbows from week 4 on, but I think there is something to build on as he enters year 2 at just 22 years old. Admittedly, I probably would have liked to have seen a little more from him, but to say he's a bust or disappointing player after 1 year would be pretty ridiculous. I'll be eager to see how Triion and the defense plays in 2025 with a new defensive coordinator, and for now, this is a B. Brian Thomas Jr. was the 4th receiver taken in the 2024 draft, but 1 year in, he is the most receiving yards and receiving touchdowns. He is 3rd in receptions behind only Brock Bowers and Malik Neighbors, each of whom had over 105 receptions. This certainly also applies to Bowers and Neighbors as well, but BTJ accomplished everything he did with not great quarterback play for a lot of the year. In the final 5 games of 2024, Brian Thomas had 41 receptions for 517 receiving yards and 4 touchdowns with Mac Jones as his quarterback. He finished the year with 87 receptions for nearly 1,300 yards and 10 touchdowns, and somehow, someway, missed the Pro Bowl. He is already an elite receiver, and I can't wait to see what a healthy Trevor Lawrence and BTJ can do for the next several years, because Trevor Lawrence is just 25 and Brian Thomas is just 22. The future of the Jags is bright with these two, and I love Thomas Jr. coming out of LSU and thought he was a tremendous pickup for the Jags when the pick was made, but I'd be lying if I said I thought he would be this good this early. He had 10 games with 80 or more yards in 2024, including 4 100-yard games, and this is an A+. Quinyon Mitchell was the first corner taken off the board, and when this pick was made, I thought this was a classic Howie Roseman selection in every sense. He sat back, let the chips fall as they may, and took the best player available, which, of course, in typical Howie Roseman fashion, conveniently aligned with what the Eagles needed. And I said that because Howie Roseman is one of the best in the business, and so is Quinyon Mitchell just 1 year later. This pick is so good that there's really not a lot to say that you either don't know or already don't think yourself. It got to the point where during his rookie season, teams just look the other way, and I don't blame them. Having a corner you can stick out there and just say take away a side of the field is huge, and Quinyon looks to be a multiple-time Pro Bowler. Per PFF, he was targeted 6 times in the wildcard win against Green Bay and allowed 2 receptions for 10 yards and had an opposing passer rating of just 2.8 when targeted. For anyone who may remember the midseason grade video, we made a joke about calling this an A grade rather than an A+ grade, and there were several comments about how people thought it was serious for a second, but this grade is the same as it was during the middle of the year. An easy A+. Chop Robinson was a pick I liked a lot for the Dolphins because even in the worst case scenario, I thought he could be a rotational rusher for Miami and that he could be a guy to bring in an obvious pass rushing downs. But Chop must have missed that memo because he had 56 pressures in his rookie year and finished second in the 2024 class in sacks with 6. I am a firm believer that you can never have enough pass rushing or quarter depth, and from a situation standpoint, I really like the idea of Chop getting to learn behind Bradley Chubb and Jaylen Phillips, even if both players were hurt. Chop played most of his rookie season at 21 years old, as he turned 22 on January 2nd, and I also think that's a positive because in theory, he should only get stronger as he gets older while retaining his technique and ability to rush the passer. I also think with the success that Rams pass rusher Jared Verse had in 2024, that Chop's rookie season was not talked about enough relative to the year he had. For reference, Chop had 56 pressures on 344 pass rushing snaps this year, and Will Anderson, the 2023 Defensive Rookie of the Year, had 59 pressures on 408 pass rushing snaps in 2023. I do not bring that up to diminish Will Anderson as much as it is to show the year Chop had, and this may surprise some people, but I really believe this pick deserves an A+ grade. Troy Fautanu was a prospect I liked a lot coming out of Washington, and despite him being drafted at number 20 overall, I thought the Steelers got a bit of a draft steal. Unfortunately, he only played in 1 game in his entire rookie season, which was against Denver in Week 2. I thought he looked solid in his only NFL game, but I'm not grading a player's rookie season on just 55 snaps. Again, I like what we saw from him at right tackle, and I think he will be a good player for the next few years, but for now, this is incomplete. Jedric Wills was the third edge rusher taken in this class, as the Colts selected Laiatu Latu from UCLA at pick 15, and the Vikings selected Dallas Turner from Alabama at pick 17. And despite being the third edge rusher taken, Wills made a significant impact in year 1, and even that's an understatement. He finished the year with 77 pressures, which was good for 4th in the NFL, only behind Trey Hendrickson, Myles Garrett, and Jonathan Grenard. Wills and fellow Florida State teammate Braden Fisk played a big part in restoring the Rams' defensive line in 2024, and over the last 2 drafts, GM Les Snead has done a tremendous job in rebuilding the trenches, and we've seen that with the success the Rams have had. Wills had 12 pressures in the 2 playoff games he played against Minnesota and Philly on just 62 pass rushing snaps, and had 2 sacks in the divisional round against the Eagles. He also had a defensive touchdown against Minnesota in the wildcard round, the team that passed over him just 2 picks prior. Wills only had 4.5 sacks during the regular season, but his presence was felt every single Sunday. I'd be shocked if he's not a multiple-time Pro Bowler. This is easy, an A+ grade. Amarius Mims was a prospect I liked a lot coming out of Georgia, and every prospect, even the quote-unquote generational ones, has questions or some sort of weakness somewhere. And with Amarius, it was the fact he only started a handful of games at Georgia, but looked like a very good prospect during his time there. Now, he was not a generational tackle prospect to be clear, but with Mims only playing a total of 638 snaps in college, there was always going to be a transition period in the NFL. Always. And for reference, he played over 830 snaps during his rookie year, and he is only 22 years old. He improved significantly as the season went on, which is what I was hoping for with Mims after some rocky times early on. He pitched a shutout against the Titans as he allowed 0 pressures in that game, and even entered Week 18 against the Steelers late in the game with a broken hand. Mims is a player I like a lot, and I think he is a legitimate solution to Joe Burrow, not taking as mmany hits as he did early on in his career. I would be very surprised if this grade is not significantly higher 1 year from now, but for Amarius Mims, we are going with a B+. Dallas Turner was the Vikings' second first-round pick of the night, as they of course selected quarterback J.J. McCarthy earlier in the draft. With Dallas specifically, there needs to be context because it's not every year where you are a first-round pick at edge and have 2 teammates both finish in the top 10 in sacks in Jonathan Grenard and Andrew Van Ginkel, both of which made the Pro Bowl. That is brought up, of course, because when you have not 1 but 2 Pro Bowlers in front of you, especially at just 21 years old, that's going to limit your playing time. I also think this pick was made for the future, and that Dallas was always supposed to contribute in a big way in 2025 and beyond. However, I do think he was underwhelming when he played outside of a few splash plays here and there, and the Seattle game was a big one for him. I think he is in a great situation to thrive long term, and ultimately I think he will, but his rookie year wasn't great, and 1 year later this gets a C. Byron Murphy was just the second defensive player taken in the 2024 draft, and I thought Byron Murphy had a solid rookie season for what should be expected from a first-year defensive tackle. He played his rookie year at just 22 years old, and what does not get discussed as much as it should by the media is not every first-round defensive tackle is going to be Jalen Carter or Aaron Donald in their rookie year, and we bring that up because it creates unrealistic expectations for guys like Byron Murphy. I still thought he held his own despite what were probably unfair expectations, and I do think he will be a good player for a long time. He drew a lot of attention on the interior, and that was noticed when watching the Seahawks play, and he had 21 pressures on 244 pass rushing snaps. We often talk about guys needing a year or 2 to develop along the trenches to really get accustomed to playing at the NFL level, and I think Byron is a good example of this, while showing flashes in his rookie year. Sure, you can be disappointed with the fact he only had half a sack as a rookie, but I think he has a lot of potential that showed in year 1, a C+ grade. Laiatu Latu was the first defensive player taken in the 2024 draft and would be the first edge rusher of 3 taken in a span of 5 picks, with the other 2 being Dallas Turner at 17 and Jedric Wills at 19. Latu had a pretty solid rookie season all things considered and finished second on the team in pressures with 38. The Colts' usage of Latu throughout his rookie season was interesting, and while Latu was on the field, I thought he played pretty solid for a rookie. One thing that I do think needs to be remembered, not just with Latu, but with most other pass rushing prospects is it takes time. The flashes were there from Latu as a rookie, and I am also a believer that the Colts defense was set up to fail quite a bit in 2024, and there's a reason Gus Bradley is no longer the team's defensive coordinator. The Colts team frustrated me as a whole in 2024, and unfortunately some of the mismanagement from the top down trickled down to Latu, who I don't think was put in a position to maximize his success. I bring this up because I really like him as a player and think he can be a guy who can get 50 pressures and 7 or 8 sacks in a year, if not more. For now, this is a B. Talisi Fuaga is up, and Fuaga had a really good rookie season, all things considered. He actually started out with back-to-back shutouts against the Panthers and Cowboys in weeks 1 and 2, and actually had 6 games without allowing a pressure in all of 2024, which was tied for 5th most in the league. That's not to say his rookie season was perfect, because it wasn't, but I think the Saints have their left tackle of the future 1 year later. Every player is going to get welcomed to the NFL at some point, and unfortunately Fuaga was welcomed to the NFL in week 7 against Denver, in which he was credited with allowing 3 sacks. What's kind of funny about that is he only allowed 6 sacks all year, with 3 in 1 game. And aside from 1 bad game, there were so many good games from Fuaga, including a shutout of the all-world pass rusher Myles Garrett in week 11. He's a good pass protector, he's an athletic tackle, and a great player in the run game, and he did all of this at 22 years old. The Saints have their problems, and we often discuss them with how they build their football team, but left tackle is not one. An A grade. Brock Bowers was the first tight end selected in the 2024 draft, and 1 year later has the most receptions in the class with 112. Bowers had nearly 1,200 yards in his rookie year and was one of the few bright spots on the Raiders. This may be a trivia question one day, but the 2024 Raiders actually had 2 1,000-yard receivers. Brock Bowers, of course, and teammate Jakobi Meyers. Everyone knew Brock was going to be a really good prospect at the tight end position from the time he stepped on the field at Georgia back in 2021, but the only question was how good. And once we got to that point, it was just how productive can he actually be in his rookie year, and now we know. And what I think is one of the more crazy things about Brock Bowers at this point in his career is he just turned 22 years old, and he did this with poor quarterback play throughout most of his rookie season. You would like to think the quarterback play will improve as his career progresses, as it's hard to imagine it gets worse. Bowers was one of the best tight end prospects we've seen over the past 10 years, and he more than played like it. He's a franchise cornerstone at 22 years old. Do not overthink the easy ones, and this is an A+ grade. Bo Nix was the 6th quarterback taken in the first 12 picks, and when this pick was made, I thought there was a chance Bo could put up good numbers in his rookie year, but in a much different way than he did. I thought there was a chance the Broncos would finish the year 5-12 or 6-11, and that they may be a few scores down in the 4th quarter, and that Bo Nix would be able to really pad his stats and make his numbers look good, especially with the supporting cast he had outside of Courtland Sutton. But Bo's rookie year was anything but that. The Broncos won both 10 games and made the playoffs for the first time since 2015, and Bo Nix had 34 total touchdowns. And 1 year later, Bo actually leads the 2024 class in completions, passing yards, and passing touchdowns. Going through adversity is huge for any young player, and Bo certainly went through his fair share, as Denver started out 0-2 and he threw 4 interceptions in those games. But like we always say, it's not how you start, it's how you finish. And Bo Nix had the best rookie season imaginable for Broncos fans after that, and they most certainly Bo-leave, an A+ grade. The Jets traded back 1 spot with the Vikings so they could get J.J. McCarthy, and the Jets could still get the player they wanted all along in Penn State tackle Olu Fashanu. I really like this draft process by former general manager Joe Douglas, even though he has been since fired, because they acquired extra draft capital and drafted a really good offensive tackle in the process. Olu didn't turn 22 until December, and a common theme with young offensive linemen is going through growing pains, and Olu was no exception. He gave up his fair share of pressures early, and Olu actually allowed 11 pressures in his first 142 pass blocking snaps, but allowed just 12 pressures on his final 230 pass blocking snaps of the season. Unfortunately, he suffered plantar fasciitis in week 16 and missed the final 2 games of the year, but the strides Fashanu made over the course of his rookie season was notable. He initially started out at right tackle and even played a game at right guard before playing his final 6 games at left tackle, where he settled in. Fashanu was dealt a fair share of adversity in his rookie season too, and I think he did a pretty good job. A B grade that should go up as his career progresses. J.J. McCarthy was the Vikings' first-round pick of the night, as the other was used on pass rusher Dallas Turner just 7 picks later. Unfortunately, McCarthy suffered a knee injury in the preseason and missed his entire rookie year. I do think his situation is extremely favorable for him to succeed in, and he will start the 2025 season at just 22 years old. I think he has a bright future ahead of him, but 1 year later, this is incomplete. Rome Odunze was the third receiver taken in the first 9 picks, and Odunze would go on to finish his rookie season with 54 receptions for 734 yards and 3 touchdowns. I'll be honest, I loved Odunze as a prospect, and I think there is a big difference between how people talk about Marvin Harrison Jr. and how he actually played, and we'll get to MHJ in a minute, but the reason I bring that up is because if there is a player to talk about the way people do with MHJ, I think it's Odunze. Rome only caught 54 passes on 101 targets in his rookie season for a catch percentage of 53.5%. He played all 17 games as a rookie and had 6 games with 25 yards or less. And I don't think Rome is on his way to being a draft bust by any means, but I do think his rookie year was slightly underwhelming, all things considered. He had 2 100-yard games as a rookie, and he will be just 23 years old at the start of the 25 season. Make no mistake about it, I loved this pick when it was made, and I think him and Caleb Williams will be a good duo in the future. I was just a little underwhelmed with Rome in his rookie year. For now, a C+ grade. The Falcons selecting quarterback Michael Penix was a shock to everyone when the pick was made, and 1 year later, I really like the pick. Unfortunately for Falcons fans, Penix only started 3 games and played in 5 games total. He entered the Seahawks and Broncos games down double digits and only threw 5 total passes within those games, so he has a really limited sample size from his rookie year. He only threw 105 passes in 2024 and threw 3 touchdowns to 3 interceptions. One of his interceptions bounced off of Kyle Pitts' hands directly into a defender's arms, which obviously was not on Penix, and I do think that's worth noting because at this point in his career, that is a third of his interceptions. I thought Penix flashed down the stretch, and especially during the Panthers game, as it was a good duel between young quarterbacks in Michael Penix and Bryce Young. I personally would grade this incomplete because of how limited of a sample size this is, but for the people who want a grade on this pick, I would probably give it a B. J.C. Latham was the second tackle off the board, and like you would expect from most rookie tackles, he went through his ups and downs. There were times where he legitimately looked like a franchise tackle, and that the Titans could pencil this pick in as a hit and go ahead and focus on improving the rest of the roster. Unfortunately, there were a lot of downs for Latham as the season went on, which was kind of surprising because I thought Latham did such a good job early on. If anything, I thought it would have been the opposite. Start out slow and end the year strong. But JC played his entire rookie year at just 21 years old, and I am optimistic about his future. If any trench player shows the flashes Latham did at 21 years old in the first few starts of their NFL career, then naturally I will be optimistic about their future. Latham allowed 47 pressures as a rookie and even allowed 7 sacks, and I think his rookie season can best be described as a roller coaster. I am really excited to see how he plays in 2025, in which he will be just 22 years old, but the struggles he had need to be documented, especially because he was the 7th overall pick. For now, this is a B-. Malik Nabers was the second receiver selected behind Marvin Harrison Jr., and in Nabers' rookie year, he had 109 receptions for 1,204 yards and 7 receiving touchdowns. One of the biggest things with Malik Nabers that I liked especially in his rookie year was how high of a floor he had. He played in 15 of the 17 possible games and had 60 or more yards in 12 of the 15 games he played, and even in the games he didn't have 60 yards, he had 59, 50, and 41, and he really didn't have any downright bad games. He had 3 100-yard games, and him and fellow rookie teammate Tyrone Tracy were 2 of the lone bright spots on the 2024 Giants. Nabers had 170 targets as a rookie, and it was due in large part to the supporting cast not being as good as Nabers is, and also given the fact the Giants were losing in a lot of their games. Nabers' best game by far was against the Colts in Week 17, where he had 7 receptions for 171 yards and 2 touchdowns, in a game where the Giants put up 45 points for the first time in several years. I think Nabers is a future superstar, and I think you can legitimately argue he is now. Like with Brock Bowers, I can't wait to see how he plays when he has a legitimately good quarterback. Regardless, this is an A+. I really thought Joe Alt was the best tackle prospect since Penei Sewell back in 2021, and he played like it during his rookie season. Alt was the definition of a blue-chip prospect, and he is already one of the better right tackles in all of football. If both Joe Alt and Rashaan Slater can stay healthy for the next few seasons, then there is a very real possibility the Chargers have their tackle duo set up for the next several years. I love this selection from the minute it was made because of the possibility of that, and anytime you can have a good wall in front of your quarterback for not just 1 or 2 years, but for several, that is a winning move by the organization. Now, the Chargers have to work on the interior part of the offensive line, but not having to worry about Slater and Alt and having Joe Alt be a plug-and-play guy for the next several years and having him play at a Pro Bowl level at 21 years old just a few years after transitioning from tight end is pretty insane, all things considered. I really think Alt has the potential to be a several-time Pro Bowler and multiple-time All-Pro if he stays healthy. Jim Harbaugh loves the trenches, and Joe Alt proved him right. An easy A+. Marvin Harrison Jr. was the 4th player taken in the 2024 draft and the first non-quarterback. Expectations were enormously high for Harrison Jr. coming out of Ohio State, and rightfully so. He was the best receiving prospect I've ever evaluated, and the one thing that I think gets blown entirely out of proportion with Harrison Jr. at the moment is people act like he had a bad rookie season. He didn't. He had 62 receptions for 885 yards and 8 touchdowns and was a good player for the Cardinals. You can certainly argue his rookie season was slightly underwhelming relative to the expectations he had entering his rookie year, but there are people out there who legitimately think he disappointed in his rookie season, and that is certainly not the case. He will be just 23 years old at the start of the 25 season, and I would be pretty surprised if he doesn't go for over 1,000 yards next year. He was credited with only 1 drop for his entire rookie season, and ironically his worst game probably came in his debut against the Bills, in which he had 1 catch for 4 yards. He responded with a 130-yard, 2-touchdown game the following week against the Rams. Marvin is a great player and he will be fine, and 885 yards and 8 touchdowns is not a bad season for any rookie. An A- grade. Drake May was the 3rd quarterback taken in the first 3 picks, and I'll be honest, I thought Drake May had a pretty solid rookie season, all things considered. The one big drawback of going to the Patriots in the 2024 draft was pretty much exactly how Drake May's rookie season played out. There was not a lot of options for May to throw the ball to, and the offensive line was also pretty bad, and we saw that week after week after week. May's numbers do not look all that good, especially when you factor in that he played 13 of 17 possible games, but he only threw a single pass in the final game of the year. He came in late against the Jets on a Thursday night game and left another game early due to injury. And when you take his numbers from the Houston game in week 6 through the Chargers game in week 17 and put them on pace for a 17-game season, May would have been on pace for over 4,000 yards and 26 total touchdowns with a not great supporting cast. I loved May as a prospect and thought he was routinely asked to go above and beyond what should be required for a 22-year-old rookie, and I think the sky is the limit for him. Just get him some help. 1 year later, this is an A-. Jayden Daniels was the 2nd player drafted in the 2024 NFL Draft, and all he would go on to do during his rookie season is go for over 4,400 total yards, have 31 total touchdowns, and lead the Washington Commanders to their first NFC Championship game since the early 1990s. I think what makes Jayden's rookie season even more impressive is he technically played all 17 regular season games, but left the Panthers game early due to injury and only played a couple of series against the Cowboys in Week 18 due to the team already having a playoff berth secured. Daniels is the epitome of what you want when you are selecting a quarterback in the top 5 of an NFL draft. This franchise had not won a playoff game since all the way back in 2005, and in Jayden's rookie year, they not only won a playoff game, but also went into the number 1 seed stadium and won by 2 scores. Jayden helped change a franchise around that desperately needed it, and Washington's future looks very bright. There's a very good chance free agents want to go to Washington now because they have a good chance at competing for a championship. Unfortunately, because they lost by 32 points in the NFC Championship game, we are going to bring this down to an A grade. And all jokes aside, you guys know this is an easy A+. Caleb Williams was the 1st overall pick in the 2024 draft, and expectations for Caleb entering his rookie year were sky high, and rightfully so. He had 3 good options to throw the ball to in DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, and Rome Odunze, and it wasn't an unreasonable take for Caleb to throw for 4,000 yards in his rookie year and to also throw for 25 touchdowns. One big thing when discussing Caleb's rookie year that a lot of people like to do is make this an entire thing of Jayden Daniels versus Caleb, and basically say that because Caleb did not have the year Jayden did, he is basically a draft bust, and that is simply not the case. This also isn't a CJ Stroud-Bryce Young situation either, where Bryce did not look good for most of his rookie year, and CJ Stroud was, of course, CJ Stroud. Williams' rookie season was much better than Bryce Young's rookie season, and I legitimately think the Bears' future is bright, especially with Ben Johnson. With as much pre-draft hype as there was around Caleb Williams, I think some people want him to fail, but he didn't play bad in his rookie year. He had over 4,000 total yards and looked pretty solid for a rookie, and 1 year later, this is a B. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, please like and subscribe, as it helps the channel tremendously, and we are closing in on 200,000 subscribers. And as always, until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.